All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order. Historic Preservation Commission, February 24th, 2015. Please note that all commissioners are present. First item is approval for the meeting minutes for November 18th and January 20th. So I've had a chance to look at the minutes and have any corrections or comments?
Take two separate motions.
Any changes? All right, why don't we do two different motions. Motion to approve the November 18th minutes.
Motion.
As submitted. Any second?
I'll second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Were there any abstentions?
I abstain. Okay.
Do I have to abstain from November since I wasn't here?
Yeah.
Nope. So I abstain from November.
Abstention. All right, what about January 20th, 2015? I move that we approve the minutes for January 20th, 2015. For a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed or abstentions? All right. Okay, so tonight's meeting is only to talk about the Historic Preservation Ordinance, and that's probably why you're all here. We put together a format to go through all of this, and we're going to kind of treat it like a typical application. What we're going to have is Michael's going to come up and kind of summarize things for us and talk to us about why we're editing or changing the ordinance, and then we're going to go through each section. And each section we're going to count like an application. So the way it'll work is Michael will kind of tee it up, tell us what's going on in that section of the ordinance, and then the commission will have a chance to ask questions and discuss that, and then we'll open it up to the public. So try to keep it orderly. If all of you want to talk, we may be here for a while, but that's kind of the way we're going to do. We're going to kind of get that portion of the ordinance put to bed, and then we're going to go on to the next section. And you had a question?
Yeah. If we have changes, would that be during the
Yeah.
commission section?
Yeah.
Okay.
So any type of editing or content or anything like that, we'll handle it there. And then we'll take down those notes as they of the comments, and then if it needs to be discussed further, if it needs some wordsmithing or something like that, then we're meeting again on March 10th, and hopefully we can wrap this all up on the 10th and get everything resolved, so we've got something for City Council to look at in March. And the only difference is, I know that there's three sections in the ordinance that are probably going to have the biggest discussion, so we're going to put those at the end. We're going to try to get done with all the easy stuff first, and then we'll open up the last section for further discussion. And then our goal is to be done by 10 o'clock tonight. Hopefully we can do that. And like I said, we've got a whole nother meeting. If for some reason things drag out, we will continue it to the next meeting on March 10th. So everyone understand? That's how we want to handle it. So I guess you have the floor.
Will you give me the privilege of doing my secretary's report before we get into the ordinance?
You said a minute and a half, right?
Minute and a half.
All right.
I just want to update the commission on a few things. If you did not see it, the house that's for sale for $10 at 627 James Street that the commission asked to be investigated about being moved, that story was picked up by the Associated Press and then hit NBC, so it got national coverage, actually. It made several national papers. So our work is being recognized. Secondly, a few of you asked about the archaeology on the Park Place project there at First and Stevens. I have a copy of the archaeological report. If any of you want to look at it, I have that for you. I didn't send it out via email. It's rather long and lengthy. And then the last thing I just want to let the commission know is that we had applied for a grant as a certified local government through Illinois Historic Preservation Agency, and we received word this week that we have received the grant tentatively, waiting for the grants funds to actually come from Washington, D.C., and that will allow us to sponsor a commissioner training session probably in October, and that will be an all-day event. So those are my three items for the Secretary's report. Are there any questions?
Nope.
That said, I would just like to give a little bit of background, a little bit of understanding about the draft that's in front of you before we get into the actual sections. The historic preservation draft represents more than 4 years of effort, beginning with my predecessor, Carla Kolfus. The historic preservation ordinance revision was identified as a stated goal of the City of Geneva's Community Development Department for fiscal year 2014, with the goal that it would be completed hopefully by April of 2015. So we are close and on target with that. I began the draft research when I started working here at the City of Geneva in 2012. However, I have to say it honestly took me approximately 18 months to gain a good understanding of the processes, expectations, and history of preservation in Geneva. During that time, I have become better acquainted with many elected officials and the residents that they represent. I have understood the culture of community development at the City of Geneva, as well as the importance of historic preservation to the community. Most importantly, I've come to understand the delicate balance between the attraction of historic Geneva and the forces that shape and struggle with its stewardship. The ordinance presented for review and comment this evening is an attempt to balance the concerns of a diverse segment of the Geneva community with the established processes and availability of staff resources, as well as the most current information about good preservation that is built on a foundation of due process, equity, and stewardship. The methodology behind the draft that you have before us is that the main focus of this draft is an attempt to strengthen some of the weaknesses, perceived or actual, in the existing ordinance, and codifying longstanding practice by staff and the Historic Preservation Commission. And lastly, it's an attempt to maintain a strategy to fairly protect those cultural elements which over time have contributed to making Geneva an outstanding community with an undeniable historic environment. In order to provide a thorough document, I have looked back over the evolution of historic preservation in Geneva since 1976 up to the present time. I have reviewed documents, proposals, and presentations that have evaluated preservation methodology since the adoption of the present ordinance in 1995. I will tell you, if you come into my office, I have a stack of paper about this big on my desk that represents that, so you're welcome to stop by and look at it any time. I have reviewed dozens of ordinances across Illinois and an equal number from across the country. I have consulted with the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency and many colleagues throughout the preservation community. I have also reviewed numerous documents about case law and real estate values as they both relate to the field of historic preservation. Aside from procedural aspects, this document represents a format that is more user-friendly and in an order that more clearly identifies the process, the requirements, the procedure, and expectations for applicants, property owners, and staff alike. So with that said, the first three sections are what I'd like to cover first. Section 10-6-1 is the purpose that is really just a minor grammatical modification of the purpose that's been stated in the 1995 version. So it's very minor changes, mostly it's grammatical edits. And I don't know if you want me to go through all three, and then we'll talk about.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean,
The definitions, I can go through them, each one that's been altered, but you will notice that there are alterations to the definitions that either clarify the intent of the definition or uses a more up-to-date terminology and definition for the terms within the ordinance. It's also been expanded to include a lot of phrases and terms that we throw around fairly frequently, but they weren't defined in the previous ordinance, so that people can follow through and know what these terms mean that we use very frequently. They're clearly defined in the ordinance. And then lastly, section 10-6-3 is surveys and research, which was identified in the ordinance, but not as its own section. But this actually identifies that one of the purposes and one of the requirements of the commission is to complete ongoing survey and research, not only within established historic districts, but in any other part of the community that may have potential historic significance, as defined by historic significance in our definitions, which are properties that are 50 years old or older. And that is one clarification I want to make in the definitions that I specifically want to point out. The Historic Preservation Ordinance of 1995 identified a fairly common approach that local ordinances typically identified buildings that were 30 years old or older as historic. I have changed it to 50, and the recommendation on that is, in talking with several colleagues across the country and at IHPA, really, 30 years is not a very long time to be able to start discerning the historic character of things in that recent past. And so it was recommended that we follow the National Park Service of 50 years to cut off as a historic deadline. So that's probably one of the most, I think that's the most significant change from the current ordinance to the current, from the previous ordinance to the current ordinance, as far as a real content change in these three sections.
All right, comments from the commission on sections 1 through 3?
Very logical. Would it be appropriate, this just stays where it is? Okay. Would it be appropriate to add a definition for demolition by neglect?
Have we had any instances of that in the past?
There's a section on it at the end of the proposal, and yes.
So is that a definition you could add?
I could add that.
Any other
I-
comments?
I wondered about adding a definition for finding a fact, because that's something that we frequently talk about, but I wonder if maybe that might be defined.
Okay.
I also think a definition for landscape feature. You mention it later on. And then also, just a point, in historic landmark, in the last line, you refer to a master designer or architect whose individual genius influenced his age. Can we have gender neutral?
Yes, please.
As soon as you pointed that out, I knew where you were going with that.
Then the other thing that I'd like to point out was actually in the first section under purpose.
Okay.
It refers to the welfare of the public of the city by ensuring the preservation of historic structures that define the history. And later on, you reference other things as well, the sites, the landscape, that sort of thing. We should probably be consistent.
That's very easily accomplished.
I wondered about, since somewhere in the document we begin to talk about the possibility of a conservation district, I wonder if it's important to indicate in the section on significant properties and historic properties, whether or not a conservation district should be included in that definition. Because we do talk about a designated historic district. Should there also say a designated historic district and designated conservation district for a significant property? And I'm looking at page 6.
Thank you.
To be consistent.
Let me check one thing here. I'm looking at the standards for review, and I want to make sure that we make a distinction between, I don't believe we make a distinction between property designation.
What page are you on?
I'm looking at page 30 of 48.
30?
And I want to look at standards for the district. That seems like that would be a reasonable,
A logical thing
yes, in
there?
looking at
Yeah.
all the parts of that.
Okay. And does it also fit with contributing? Yes?
Yes, yes, it does.
Thank you.
Are we doing 6-3, 10-632?
Yep,
Well, one, two, and three?
1, 2, and 3.
That's what we're talking about? Okay,
Did you
that's
have
what
more,
I thought.
Carolyn?
I think I'm done with 1, 2, and 3.
I actually saw one more note that I had.
Okay,
In 10-6-3, point number 3, you refer to the potential landmarks of a particular architectural style or school, or of a particular architect, engineer, builder, designer, or craftsman. If we could add the word artisan in there as well,
What page are you on?
on number 3, on
Page 7.
page number 7.
7? Okay.
I believe that's probably the word that's missing.
Artisan?
all right.
Okay.
Anything else on sections 1, 2, or 3?
I think there's just a typo. It should say and photographs instead of add photographs.
On what
The
page?
paragraph on page 7, under surveys and research. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th sentence.
Oh, add photographs.
Just a typo probably, right?
Oh, that one may have been picked up after yours was sent out. Okay, yes, that's corrected.
All right. Anything else with those first 3 sections? All right, does anyone from the public have comments on the first 3 sections? All right, this is on the first 3 sections.
Mr. Chairman, may I turn this on?
There should be a button,
You should be on, you should be on.
face, then you should get a red light,
No, it
or
should
green
be on.
light.
It's on.
It should be on.
There you go.
Mr. Chairman, may I make some remarks about the process that brought us to this discussion?
I just don't know if that's appropriate right now. We're going through the
Okay.
ordinance.
Yeah, well, Mr. Lambert set it up by saying this was the way we arrived at
Right.
presenting this, so I thought
Yeah.
it might be appropriate to make some remarks about how we see a difference in the way it was set up, and I think it'd add to the discussion.
But what I would like to see is what changes to the ordinance you would like to make.
I see. Okay, so,
And that's what we're here for, is to discuss the ordinance.
okay. I thought we were going to discuss the report that was on the agenda, and part of the agenda that was sent out to the public that included a statement from Mr. Lambert on how the research was done and where it was done. If I'm wrong, then I guess there's another forum. And what would that forum be?
I don't know. I mean, the
Okay.
purpose here is to go through the ordinance as it's drafted and comment on how we
But-
would like it changed or edited or,
Okay. But the purpose is
stricken.
not, the purpose then is not to look at what was put on the agenda and sent out to the public. Thank you.
I'm not sure what report you're talking about. It says, item 4, HPC review of draft historic preservation ordinance.
I'm referring to the cover letter that was part of the document that preceded all of the detail.
Okay, I'm not aware of that cover letter.
Mr. Lambert?
Okay.
Is it the memo?
Is it the memorandum you're talking
memorandum.
about?
He's talking
So I
about the
think
memo.
that was just a setup
summary. Just
to
a
look at the
summary.
ordinance.
I think it was, yes.
Yeah.
Right, it's just a summary.
Pardon me?
It's just a summary.
Yeah, so I'd rather have you talk about what you disagree with the ordinance rather than what you disagree
Well,
with
I-
the process or,
Is there an appropriate time to address this committee on that issue? Or is there some other process within the city that issue can be addressed?
what I'm wondering is what is the purpose of that?
Well, I'll summarize quickly if you'll allow me.
Okay, if you'll go quickly.
The cover states that the recommendations were drawn from a number of sources, which include citizens. And I'm a citizen, and in fact, I submitted hundreds of signatures on the subject of changing the ordinance to this committee, or to the city, and I spoke in front of this committee, in front of the city council. Early on, I asked Mr. Lambert if he'd meet with me, and he was very agreeable, and then the mayor stepped in and said, no, I don't want you to influence the independent thought process of staff.
Okay.
And I had trouble getting my head around that. You don't want me to influence. I want to give you my input, and I want to understand. I want you to vet what we're thinking. And I had that conversation with Mr. Lambert. I think the mayor then turned to Mr. Lambert and said, don't meet with him. And in fact, we were excluded from meeting with anybody on this subject all through the last, well, I'll say the last 4 years, but more appropriate the last 6 months. The report is a professional document. There's no question about it. It was put together by one of the top professionals in the country, and it was in consultation with like-minded professionals from around the country. You can't deny that. The resulting recommendations are a product of insulated thinking. And I don't mean that as, well, I guess I do mean it as insulated thinking. I think if you had sat down and listened to the concerns point by point from the citizens, the hundreds of citizens that presented petitions, it would have been an easier process, and it would have been less angst on the part of the citizens, and I think it would have been smoother tonight. The commission, the staff, they were all aware of the interest that we've had in this subject, and we were intentionally excluded. And I think that's important. I think that's extremely important for process going forward. Don't exclude the individual citizens or a group of citizens or some several hundred people that signed a petition from sitting down and talking about the detail before it gets here. It's just wrong. And I will keep my remarks from here forward on specifics, but I think it's important the record reflect that we wanted to be part of the process and we were purposely excluded. And incidentally, not just, I don't believe it's just this side of the issue. There are people that disagree with me, I believe are also excluded. So we have an insulated process. Thank you.
Well, I want to see the proof in the pudding when you look at a specific item in the ordinance and tell me that you did not have input in that, because I think
Well, no, I
what you will
didn't.
find is that you've had a number of correspondence to all of us, the mayor and Michael
Absolutely.
and us, and
And
That's
never an answer on any of the specifics.
I think the
Question-
answer is in the document now.
Yeah, and.
If you
but
don't agree with it, then
in
you
the
need
pro-
to speak
I
up
asked
about
that
it.
our position be vetted. We didn't want to be in a position of proposing things that were impossible, that we were wrong on.
Mm-hmm.
There were a number of errors that we found in our own thinking as we went along. We wanted the opportunity
Sure.
to speak to that. So some of the written communications we sent out, we always said, you know, may we have your feedback, may we discuss this, may we talk about it, will it be included in the report, and so forth. We never got an answer.
Well, I think that's what we're going through right now, to see what was included in your comments and what wasn't, and
Yeah,
give an
well,
opportunity to bring that up.
it's not necessary to have people angry with the process. So I'm saying going forward in the future, don't make people angry by excluding them. For 4 years, I've never been able to sit down with anybody on staff and discuss my concerns. For 4 years. I
Are we
talked,
here to discuss the ordinance, because I'm a citizen of Geneva too, and
Right.
that's why I came to this meeting.
Right, and that's
I have
what-
other places to
That's
be.
what we want to do.
So, Mr. Chairman, if you could please, lead us.
So-
At what
I
point when we
appreciate-
discuss all the points of that ordinance, I missed a little bit, the first 3 seconds, is that included?
First 3 seconds, if you have any comments on those first 3 sections, then we will talk about those. And then we're going to go on to the next section, and the next section, and next section, and so, yes. You state your name and address.
I'm Hans Heimann, 107 Batavia Avenue. And my question is, what is the purpose of this meeting? Because right now it's a communication between you guys as if you have never seen the document before. And we surely never seen it. So what's the purpose from us being here when this is an internal discussion about the project which you already should be familiar with?
Right, well, we sent this out last week.
But you're working on this document for years, and now you're talking about little words changes and whatever. We don't even know what this whole thing is all about. And we should be able to ask this committee what the purpose of this whole document is. And we are totally excluded. We sit here and watch a show which is semi-pathetic. Thank you very much.
Any other comments? Yeah, Mike.
Mike Simon, 614 Easton, Geneva. In definitions, going to 16.6.6A1 under application, there's no definition of either group of persons or association. Could you clarify that? Are those Geneva residents, Geneva associations, any group of persons? How will those be identified?
Do you want to talk about that now or when we get to section 10.6.6?
Since it's in definitions, I can point to you
Okay.
that applicant is clearly defined, Mike, as the owner of record and/or its agent or representative or another interested party who is a resident of the city of Geneva, seeking authority from the city to undertake a course of action related to a specific property or parcel. So it does require that it be a resident of the city.
And groups of persons or associations, the same?
Would have to have some resident of the city as a representative of that group or association, yes.
So just some resident of the city?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I may not have heard you correctly, but did you say that the groups of persons or associations must be residents of the city?
There must be representation in that group or association who is a resident of the city. There has to be a resident of the city involved with the application process.
Okay, I think the resident is a great idea. I would ask, who are these groups of people? Who are these associations? Are they nonprofit? They certainly should be. We don't want for-profit organizations to have the authority that has been delegated by the city.
Sir, can
to
I get your name and
outsiders.
address, please? Your name and address.
909
I'm
South.
sorry, name?
909 South Batavia Avenue.
And what is your name? Your name?
Marty Smersage.
Okay, thank you.
So I think it's important. I think it's great that it's residents. I think it's great that they be required to be part of any group. But who are those groups? They should be nonprofit groups, and they should be vetted. And you should have a description of how you'll vet those groups. There's all kinds of ways to vet a nonprofit group, and we should know who they are and what their purpose is, and they should have a mission statement that has been accepted and vetted by this group and by the city council.
A group could also include a group of investors who are investing in a property but are not registered owners. So I've purposely left, and looking at several different ordinances, I purposely left groups and associations to that term, and we'd have to deal with that as we get applications. Because if you try to define every group, and I started looking at trying to define groups and associations, and I think that it gets into dangerous territory, because somewhere you're going to leave some sort of group out, and that's not the intent. It's keep it as an open interpretation. It's going to require some discernment by staff and by commissions. I mean, if a group of people is just put together as an ad hoc group and wants to make a nomination, but they're all residents, that qualifies as a group. I mean, if a group of neighbors wanted to get together.
Well, they'd be residents if they were
Right,
a
they'd be
group of
residents,
neighbors.
but, so I think it's a slippery slope to try to define groups and associations too tightly because there's a lot of different groups and associations. You could get into associations of religious organizations, and there's a lot of different ways those are organized, and that could be, again, you could unintentionally exclude a form of association. So I've looked at several ordinances, I've talked to different people, and groups and associations kind of left vague in a lot of ordinances because it's very difficult to define those.
Don't other ordinances include nonprofit organizations?
But it may not just be nonprofit. There could be a for-profit
There
group.
could be a for-profit group that could walk in and make an application to make an entire district historic, or make one house historic, or a conservation district. A group that, a commercial group, a for-profit group that could walk into our city and do that. That's wrong.
As long as there is a resident involved with that organization. There has to be resident representation.
I would suggest that they should be also headquartered here in the city in order to do it. I think it's wrong to have a nonprofit organization have that kind of authority. But it's up to you.
Michael, I actually think that the applicant could be, the definition could be tightened up, because later on, we do talk about groups and organizations, and I don't see that actually in the definition. And then the group or the organization, if it's a corporation, is that, does a member or a board member have to be a resident of Geneva, or exactly how does that work?
It again depends on how they're incorporated, and I mean, you could have a resident, and they could incorporate in Delaware, and so the board of directors may not be residents, but the person in charge or the agent in charge may be a resident of Geneva. I just think there's so many different organizations and types of associations that you're not going to cover them all if you try to tighten it up too tightly. But if you've got recognition, I'll certainly.
Could we at least include the words groups and associations? Wait, it's groups and associations, groups and organizations.
Groups and associations.
Groups and associations.
In the applicant definition?
Applicant?
Well, I think you want a definition of groups. Do you want a definition of that, or is
Well,
that
no, I think a group is
pretty?
kind of
yeah.
self-explanatory.
But where it says owner of record and/or its agent or representative or another interested party, isn't sort of that like an umbrella term for group? Maybe we're getting distracted here.
Well, I guess it's just that we say groups, associations, and resident group and association later on.
You're looking for parallelism.
I'm looking for consistency.
Okay.
All right, so any other questions or comments on the first three sections? Yes.
Hans Hyman. I have a question about withdrawal by owner objections. And it states, I don't know what part of this is, point number 9. And it says, in case of an application for historic district designation of a
Yeah,
geographic
we're not to
area.
that section yet. I don't think.
Is
We're
this in
not
the
to that
first
section
sentence?
yet.
We are not?
No.
No, not yet.
Okay, well, thanks.
So hold your thought.
I've kind of lost your discussion.
All right, if we're done with those first three sections, what I'd like to do is to jump to section 10-6-9, construction plan review.
10-6-9.
Yeah.
What page are we on?
I'm looking at
That would be page number 30.
page 30.
Okay. Okay.
Do you want to set that up for us, Michael?
Okay. Again, the construction plan review is an existing section of the existing ordinance. However, the revised text of this attempts to clearly outline the application procedures, submittal requirements, the requirement for the payment of fees, what the review standards are for construction plan review, how applications may be withdrawn, the appeal of commission decisions, and identifying the suspension of work during the review period and a period during which the approval remains valid. Those are items that are inferred in the existing ordinance or in our existing practice, but are not clearly identified in the current text. So again, the construction plan review is for those elements of the building visible from the public right-of-way, which again mirrors what we have in the current ordinance. It is, it's review for individually designated historic landmarks, properties within the historic district or properties within a designated conservation district. And it's only for that work that requires a building permit as defined by the City of Geneva building ordinance and/or the building official. That again mirrors our current practice. The procedure is more clearly defined than what's in our current ordinance under item A. It identifies the exact elements that are required as part of what we look for in a permit. This is in consultation with the building division and what our practice has been. So it now is enumerated, where before it just said you had to provide what the building official deemed was a complete permit. So now this information is clearly identified for the public and any applicant, an architect or design professional, to know exactly what is being required to be submitted for our review. It also identifies and unifies the format in which we get the submissions. For those of you who don't know, a lot of my time has been spent trying to get this information in a way that we can get it transmitted to everybody. And so we have now defined that, and we have removed the requirement for a lot of paper copies. We used to require multiple paper copies. We've eliminated that in an effort to become more paperless. Fees are remaining as the practice has been, in that those fees are calculated and collected by the building division. We have nothing to do with the actual establishment of fees or the collecting of them. The filing is just, again, a clarification. And again, it identifies that the filing must be complete on the forms that are provided by the building division. The next change, the review of work at a historic landmark or property within the district, actually refers to what we used to call our permit review matrix that we worked on. We have removed the word matrix, and several people were stumbling over that, and it's now permit review table. But it's the same document that has been reviewed here and that we've been using now successfully for about 16 months. And so that is another tool that gives the public and design professionals a checklist of what needs to be reviewed and what will be reviewed by the commission and what will be reviewed administratively by staff. It also, again, identifies a time frame that they will be reviewed in the order that complete applications are received. That's implied, but now it's clearly stated. And we do have a permit tech who takes in all the permits now here at the City of Geneva and makes sure that the permits are complete before it comes to my desk, so that it makes for the reviews a much more efficient process. It also clarifies that projects that are submitted in a complete format and on time will be directed to the next regularly scheduled meeting. So there's no question or ambiguity about the scheduling of those projects for review. And it also states that we will supply a certificate of appropriateness, which we have been doing, and you'll remember we changed the body of our approval letter to include that as a certificate of appropriateness. We don't issue a frameable certificate in this community like some communities do. We just define it with the letter, and that is issued to the applicant with their permit. The projects for a property within a conservation district, we'll talk more about the conservation districts in a little bit, but that work is all being proposed to be reviewed administratively, and the primary purpose behind that is to provide an educational opportunity with people who have properties that could be rehabilitated more in keeping with a preservation standard. Not a requirement, but an opportunity to reach out to them and educate them about opportunities to rehabilitate their buildings more sensitively. If there is a concern that a project may not it may be more complex or complicated than the staff feels comfortable reviewing, it can be brought to the commission and will be brought to the next regularly scheduled meeting after the application has been submitted. So again, eliminating that ambiguity about delay and timeliness of review. Clearly outlines what the commission's responsibilities are and what their analysis is limited to and required to include under item 6. Item 7 is just a requirement for a public meeting for the review of the work on a historic landmark or a historic district property. We do allow for a withdrawal by the applicant at any time. Again, it was implied but not implicitly stated that they can withdraw once they've made application. And then the commission, under item 9, it says what your role is, that you can request modifications or approve the proposed work. And again, it identifies the findings of fact must be based on the standards of review. So issues that are not part of our review process, even though they may be of concern to commissioners, that's not, it clearly defines it's not our purview to review those. Again, following the course of action that's been in place, that if there's any decision made by the Historic Preservation Commission, it gets appealed to the City Council. And also, it puts an obligation on the commission to act in a timely manner, because if we fail to act in a timely manner or grant the grant the request, then there is the right for appeal. And then it also puts a time frame, because one of the things that has been pointed out in some of the lengthy information we've gotten is that some of the timeframes weren't very clear as to how quickly these things need to proceed, and so we've tried to tighten that up, and we've identified that there's a 30 days after the appeal is made, it must be heard by the City Council. And then for the Commission's action to be reversed on an appeal, it does require a 2/3 majority vote of the City Council. During the time the project is being proposed or being considered for construction work, no work is allowed to continue. That's the current practice right now. That is the practice of the building department. A building permit is not issued until this commission reviews a project. And then one of the things that is new in the ordinance is a statement of a lapse of a certificate of appropriateness. And what we have called for is that once the commission makes an approval for a project, there is a 24-month period from the date of issuance of a certificate of appropriateness to complete that work. It does allow for extensions of an approval to be granted by the building commissioner in consultation with the preservation planner for periods up to 6 months at a time, provided that the work is proceeding in good faith. So someone can't start a project and let it sit for 24 months without any work and then ask for an extension of time. It would probably have to come back to the commission for a new review. And that, again, is something that is found in almost all of the ordinances that I've reviewed that were written in the last 5 to 10 years. Again, that's something that a lot of communities are grappling with. Section.
Yeah, the commission's going to talk first, and then the public will get a chance to comment on it.
Section 610, or do you want to?
No, let's stick with 9.
Do you want to have?
Yeah, let's stop here.
Okay.
So comments from the commission on 10-6-9.
Michael, where did you get the 24 months?
Looking again at most of the ordinances, again, looking at any ordinance in Illinois, it varied from 12 months to 48 months. The majority of them were 24 months. We had 2 construction seasons roughly. And then when I looked at ordinance across the nation, 24 months was the predominant amount of time. So it's arbitrary. It seems reasonable. I did talk with Dustin Schultz, our building official, and he said there's very few projects that extend beyond 24 months. So he thought that was a reasonable time frame.
How long is a permit good for?
Currently?
Yeah.
a building permit is good for 1 year, correct?
Right.
But a certificate of appropriateness or an approval by this commission is unended right now at this point. So that's why we have seen some projects come to us 7 or 8 years after they were approved, and a lot of things have changed in that time.
I agree that we need to set a time frame on that, simply because just so much can happen in between. But I'm wondering if because it's already tied to a permit, that somehow we keep it tied to that permit,
So are you suggesting 12 months as opposed to 24?
if that's what the permit is.
Well,
Would you, when you get a permit, if you haven't built within 12 months, do you have to get a new permit?
once the permit is issued, they have 12 months. So you could get an approval at this at this level, at the commission level, and never come in and pick up your permit, never pay for the permit.
Got it, okay.
And so it's not until they receive a check at the building division that you get the permit in hand, that's when the 12-month clock starts.
Okay, and so, let's say that I plan my project, I come before the commission, get it approved, but then, for whatever reason, I wait a year to get the permit, that would be a year for me to finish the project then?
Correct.
Okay, got it.
And essentially, the way this is written, it allows you for up to 4 years to finish a project, because you can get up to 4 6-month extensions as long as work is progressing.
Okay.
So, say there was some unforeseen event in the people's lives and construction ceased for some time, it doesn't negate the approval if work is still progressing in some fashion, if it's at a slower pace.
And then taking it to the extreme, if those 4 6-month periods, so 4 years, expire, then you would get a new certificate of appropriateness.
You'd have to come back before the commission and get a new certificate of appropriateness, yes.
Okay.
That makes sense.
All right, other comments on that section? Let's have the commissioners first.
Do any of these ordinances have a final compliance review?
Some communities do and some don't. Quite frankly, a final review is a little bit of a challenge right now with the staffing level, with me being part-time. It could be, in the high peak season, it'd be very difficult sometimes for me to get out as fast as some of these projects would be finished. And you're unnecessarily holding up an occupancy permit from being issued if I can't get out there with my schedule. If that's a pleasure of the commission, you want to make sure there's a final review, many of the ordinances have that. I just left that out again because of a recognition of my time constraints here.
See, our inspectors are very good. If there's any question on the plans regarding the HPC's recommendation, they're very good about contacting us and asking for us to visit the site, confirm that it complies.
Because I'm thinking your project could follow the building code, but not necessarily our recommendations. So your building inspector would say it meets code, but it might not, it might be under a material or something that we didn't approve, say.
Right, so if there's any question on material, they're very good about contacting us and asking us to visit the site and make sure that's what was approved by the HPC.
Have we had any occasions where things have been out of compliance?
There have been a few times, and our building inspectors have asked me to go out and look at a site and make sure that what they're seeing out there is really what was approved, and we've had a few that had to be corrected here and there, but we've handled it very internally. And we've had other cases where the building inspectors have said, we think it's done, would you just take a walk by or drive by and see if the exterior is really what it was supposed to be. So we have kind of an informal arrangement without making it a mandatory inspection. There are times when there's been some very specific elements on some projects where we've had some very specific architectural requirements. They've said, please walk by and make sure that what's been installed is what the commission asked for. And so right now, it's not formalized that there is an actual final inspection by me on behalf of the commission. But again, we have a very good relationship back and forth. I mean, I'm in the building department office 7, 8 times a day. They can catch me if there's any questions right now, so.
Okay.
I have a question.
I'm sorry, to Al's point, can we somehow tie that to that final inspection and the inspectors that are already out there, so that it says in the code, somewhere that it's going to be looked at again, not necessarily by you, but by somebody who's already there? And then, of course, if they have questions, they would go to you.
Where would that be in this section?
I think
not
it
in
might
the
need to
section.
be a
No, I
link.
don't think it's in the section. You add
Would it
that.
be in this section at all, though? That would be, you know, I think,
Construction.
'cause this is more of the actual review that goes on.
Well, they talk about suspension of work
Okay.
and the lapse of the certificate of appropriateness. I guess the next step would be, you know,
The final,
the final bit,
final,
which is just, you know, that the inspectors who are already there, nobody knew, say, yeah, it kind of looks like what you wanted.
And Michael, you could just say staff. It doesn't necessarily need to be preservation planner does that.
I think that's a good addition. I think that's a good section to add in, and Dave and I were just talking that we can talk to the building division and work out some language to bring back to you on the 10th of what seems reasonable with them and our staffing times.
You, Jennifer, you.
I answered my own question.
Okay. That's very good.
It was something I was curious about if anybody violated the construction plan review, but then I remembered that there was a section on it at the end.
Okay. Okay. And really what this is, Michael, is it's a formalization of what we've already been doing over the last several years.
Yes.
So we weren't following the ordinance necessarily. Okay, last call for comments from the commission.
Yeah, in the section on procedure, on page 31,
What number is that, Carolyn?
Page
It's-
31.
page 31A, procedure, in this section. Is it appropriate to add the word conservation district along with any property within a historic district and/or conservation district shall be subject to the following review process? Does it make sense to put those words there? I realize the review process for properties in the conservation district is somewhat different.
Do you want to just look at that, Michael? and-
Yeah, I just want to
Think
make
about
sure.
it later?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're not requiring a higher level of submittals for the conservation
Right.
district than what is intended. So I will look at that.
Okay,
Just capture that and,
thank you.
all right. Okay, if that's all from the commission, we have the public. Said you had a question on this section? Can you come up here and give your name and address?
Jeff James, 825 South Batavia Avenue. Just a question of clarification.
Sure.
As I understand it. So as I understand it, at any point in time, somebody can come and designate my house, let's say, as wanting to be part of this preservation. Is that accurate? Let's say I want to go do an addition. Let's say I go get my permit. At what point is that person, anybody, entity or otherwise, able to come and say, hey, you know what, I think we should designate that property as, you know, historic, or whatever you guys do that. At what point does that happen? Does it happen before the permit, after the permit, when building starts? At what point is that?
Do we want to talk about that now? Do you have a quick answer, Michael?
The two issues are unrelated at this point. I mean, if you're applying for a building permit, that doesn't trigger anybody doing any historic review if you're not.
Well, it's related to me if I'm doing the building.
No, I understand.
Go ahead.
Let me explain.
Go ahead.
If you're applying for a permit to do a building,
Yep.
you're going to come into the building department, you're going to file the application with the building department. Nobody's going to look at it if it's not a designated property or historic property. If somebody has come in and nominated your property for some reason, before, during, or after your process, you're going to be notified. We're going to talk about that process a little bit later, but there is a
Let's
notification.
let's just stop this so I understand, pardon me. So I get my building permit, I start my construction, I line up my contractors, and you know, if anybody been through a building project, you can understand what a task that can be. All these contractors are backed up, they have jobs after, et cetera, so you got a whole line of events happening. I get my building permit, everybody says, okay, you're doing a good job, I get all my engineering drawings done that I pay thousands and thousands of dollars for. I start building, you know, my neighbor maybe doesn't like the way that thing's going. he comes in and says, you know, I'm gonna, and it wouldn't be my neighbor, sorry, Marty, but anybody comes off the street and says, you know what, I don't like the way that thing's going, I think I'm gonna designate that. So you're telling me at that time, you're able to designate it, and then I'd have to stop?
No, that's not what I said. What I
Okay,
said.
is that what the ordinance said, not what you said? So I
No.
thought you said you'd have to stop as soon as your property is designated or submitted for, tell me that part, I need to
But you've
understand
already
that.
got your permit.
I got my permit, but what
Right, so you
about,
got your permit, so
Yeah,
you're
that's
done. So that project's done, if I understand this correctly, is that
if
once you
somebody
have
comes
your
in after
permit.
and wants to designate my property, I thought I heard that the work has to stop.
No,
No.
let-
Can't start it because you don't have your permit.
No, I already have my permit, and you said I could, the historic thing could come anytime. Am I inaccurate there?
Give me 1 second, I'll try to explain this to you. And we're going to get ahead a little bit, so I apologize to the chair. If you were to be under construction with an existing permit, say, I'll just throw out something, say you're putting an addition on the front of the house. I just need to give you an example. If somebody were to apply, and we'll get into this detail, there is a process now that is not in place now that requires a pre-application meeting. We're going to pull the information on the permit that you have and talk with the applicant to see even if what you've already been approved to do has altered the historic character of the house or the building. If it has, we're going to recommend that the applicant not pursue it. Now, we can't stop them from not pursuing it. They could go ahead and finish filing it. But you're also, and we'll get into the details of this, you're going to be notified immediately if an action like that has taken place. Now, there's a lot of other provisions that are in this ordinance now for non-owner-generated applications. And I don't want to jump ahead of that because that's going to be a long discussion. So I would tell you that what you're saying could be a very, very rare example.
But it could happen.
Very, very rare.
Why, you know how bad that sounds, how wrong that is? I think we all agree with that.
Well,
That
if you
can't
let me
happen.
finish. Well,
If you guys are doing your job, you're reviewing all the permits, I suggest you put any applicant that has to happen has to be at least prior to the permit. You can't go to an owner who's in the middle of a construction project with all his contractors lined up, with all his engineering drawn, with all his investment made, and then just have anybody come in, I don't care what the process, if you're saying it can happen, that can't happen.
Well,
That's ridiculous.
And what I would say is, when we get to that section, which is.
I think we're at that section.
We're not at that
You,
section.
so just so I understand that, at this point, what you're telling me is that can happen. Is that accurate?
it could happen if somebody.
Can it happen? Yes or no? It's simple, right?
No, it's not a simple answer.
I think you're taking it out of context.
And also, if you have a,
Would you like to move on to the next section, or do you want me to?
and
have
if,
a debate?
when we get to that section, then we can look at that section and you can make your comment and we can figure out how to solve that.
Okay,
That
so at
is an
this point,
issue.
you're telling me that can happen. Is that just yes or no, right?
It's not a yes or no. It is not a yes or no.
I
There's a
think
lot of
this
factors.
section is about houses that are already historically designated, so let's talk about the ones that are already historically designated and put that one to that other section.
All right. Other comments regarding this section? Not historic designation.
I swear to God, I'll sit down immediately and pick up the wrong section, because it is confusing. There's 50 pages, and we received it over the weekend, and trying to absorb
did
it
we.
and to keep up with the speed that you people can handle it is difficult for the audience. You mentioned fees. What do those fees apply to?
I think that's the other discussion. I think we should cover that under the application process. I think that's a more logical.
Are you talking about the
We'll
building?
discuss
per-
it.
Are you talking about the
I think
building
it'll be less
permit fees
confusing.
or the historic designation fees?
Pardon me?
Are you talking about the building permit fees or the historic
I
designation?
was asking, I didn't quite hear him, to be honest with you. The mics aren't very loud. The system isn't as loud as it usually is at a city council meeting. So I didn't hear you clearly, and I heard fees, and I said, oh, what is that?
Yeah, those are the building permit fees.
Okay, thank you.
And at this point, and at no point are the building permit fees higher for people in the historic district than otherwise.
Correct,
They are always the same.
correct.
Okay.
Okay. Other questions on the, yes, come on up. Give your name and address.
Chris Bordage, 40 South Lincoln,
Spell your last name.
Bourdage.
Thank you.
So the construction plan review is for homes that are already in a historic district? That's
Correct, yes.
okay, because I guess on page 34, number 9, suspension of work. So if your home is not in a historic district, this section here doesn't, paragraph 9 doesn't pertain to that. It's confusing because it just says construction plan review. It doesn't say construction plan review if your home is in a historic district.
The entire ordinance is about the historically designated properties. So that is suspension of work for an application for any construction work that is reviewed by the Historic Preservation Commission. So if you're
Just
not
don't
a
want you to
designated
start
building, you're
doing your
not being
work
reviewed by the
as you're
Historic
applying
Preservation
for a
Commission.
permit.
Okay, and I know that the whole thing is on historic preservation, but you can have a house that's not in the historic district that somebody nominates for a historic landmark. So if you're not in the historic district, the construction plan review
Doesn't
doesn't
apply.
affect that,
No.
and no one, and so that doesn't apply to someone coming in and trying to nominate your house after the fact.
Right.
So that's strictly, okay. Is there a header for that, as far as, is that a
another-
subsection
it's
of
another
something?
part of the ordinance,
Because I'm
you know.
thinking if you put construction plan review for homes in historic district, it might clarify that section just a little bit.
Well, it does, ma'am, if you look at the first paragraph under 10.6.9, it says, "Construction plan review shall be complete for any new construction, addition, remodeling, rehabilitation, renovation, or restoration work," and then it identifies the 3 factors of which the work would be reviewed under this
Got it.
ordinance.
Oh, okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, any other comments on this section? Yes, come on up.
I just wanted to point out, Carolyn Jurdy, 525 Fulton Street. On page 34, it goes 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then you flip the page and it goes 10, 9, 10.
We've just picked that up.
Okay.
Thank you. The world of cut and paste, we've caught that. Thank you.
All right, any other comments for this section? Okay, the next section, we're just gonna go on to the next section, which is 10-6-10, which is called ordinary maintenance and repair.
Okay, again, this section is virtually unchanged from the existing ordinance, and this just dovetails into the existing building code.
Okay.
So I don't really have much to say about it.
It's just one paragraph.
It's procedural.
So any comments on that? Comments?
Oh, well, I was curious. How is it that the percentage of 25% was considered appropriate for this? Oh, sorry. I'm in the wrong place.
All right, anything from the
apologize.
public on maintenance and repair? We do get that question sometimes at our meetings, but, all right, then the next one is 10-6-11, demolition of historic landmarks or historic properties.
This is a completely new section that is based on a variety of information. It is based on practice of the Community Development Department and also on demolition ordinances that have been used in other communities in Illinois and have been tested by the courts. What this allows for is we did not identify in the previous ordinance whether or not you could demolish a property, and that's been a discussion. We see demolition requests in the historic district, and the process wasn't very clearly spelled out. So, in fact, you had to look at several places in the code to kind of piece together what the requirements were for a demolition ordinance. So what we've tried to do is to bring it all together in one section in an orderly process that again mirrors the process set out in the designation sections. So the demolition is based on 25% of any exterior street facade or more than 25% of the exterior envelope of a building. And I'll just answer Carolyn's question since she started to ask that. That, again, the ordinance vary widely from 10% to 50%, but the majority of the the ordinances that I reviewed stuck in at 25% because that's when you really could start having an impact on the historic character, quarter of a facade or a quarter of the building envelope. Also, we allow in our building matrix for up to 20% of exterior materials to be replaced under ordinary repair and not have to come to the commission. And so I felt that saying this, anything lower than the 20% would cause a conflict in our permit review
They can do
table.
that without a permit.
They can do that without that permit. That's considered ordinary repair. So the procedure is that for demolition, we would have a pre-application meeting with the appropriate staff members, and it involves often zoning, building, historic preservation, lots of different parts of our process. It identifies the items that are required in the application. There is nothing new on this list that is being asked for that has not already been a part of the process. It's just that, again, they weren't all listed in one singular place to find them. The fees, again, are out of our purview. Those are developed and collected by the building division. Again, the applicant or the application must be filed with the building official. And then with the application for demolition, we are asking for one set of addressed envelopes with appropriate postage and the names and addresses of all the owners within 350 feet of the property. And
That is the applicant's.
that's the applicant's responsibility to provide to the, with the application.
The applicant for demolition?
The applicant for demolition.
That applicant, okay.
Yes. And then there wasn't real clear, there wasn't a clear schedule of how the process, how the application would be reviewed. And so we've now laid out a process, and this process is really, again, determined by current practice and what we're able to, how quickly we're able to process things through the department, partly as a function of coordinating with all the appropriate staff members, but also with given that I'm part-time. So we have a requirement that within 10 working days of the filing of an application, the preservation planner shall review the submitted application for demolition and inform the applicant of any deficiencies. If the applicant fails to rectify those deficiencies within 30 days, it results in automatic withdrawal of the application. They would have to start the process over again. Upon notice of the complete demolition application, we are requiring now that demolitions of a historic landmark or any properties that are contributing or significant properties within the historic district would require a public hearing rather than just being a case in front of the commission. And non-contributing buildings would just be a regular case in front of the commission. The public hearing for that would have to be published per state statute with not less than 15 days and not more than 30 days before the public hearing. And it's the requirement to erect at least one sign on the property stating that the property is proposed for demolition. This process follows a lot of the demolition ordinances in the suburban area. Hinsdale uses this process. That's the one I'm thinking of right away. Plainfield uses this process as well for demolitions. So once the application is received and 10 days prior to the public hearing, then the notices are mailed to the surrounding properties so that they're all aware that there is an action being proposed within the historic district or on a historic landmark in their area. Let's see. Again, we outline what the commission's responsibilities are in reviewing the demolition and what the extent of their review procedure is. We identify a public hearing and identify that the applicant bears the burden of proof that the subject property cannot be economically, cannot be returned to an economically viable use. It's not our job to prove the case for them. They need to provide the documentation, prove the case for demolition. We do allow the applicant to withdraw at any time, and there have been times where there have been demolitions proposed, and then they have, for whatever reason, they've changed their mind, so we have that clearly identified as how that works. And that also, with their withdrawal of the application, it terminates any fees being incurred as part of the process. Again, this is it's our policy, but now it's in the proposed code, limits the commission's responsibility to looking at the object or the building that's being proposed for demolition and not any of the extraneous issues, not what might replace the building. If they're proposing the demolition of a wing on a building, that doesn't allow the commission to review other aspects of the building. We're looking at the proposed action. So that, again, is very clearly defined now. And then following demolition ordinances across the state and reading a lot of case law on this, the commission has the right to ask for a up to 120-day extension of a demolition request based on three factors, and only those three factors. It just can't be, we've always liked that house on the hill, so we wanted to delay it. It's got to meet one or more of these three criteria. The purpose of the 120 days is to allow for alternates to demolition. Again, that's a reasonable time to investigate other design alternatives or other material alternatives to what's being proposed. And then we outlined two causes for which a demolition can be approved by the commission. It's either infeasible from a technical aspect, or there's no reasonable economic return. In many demolition ordinances across the state and the country, economic viability is not a provision, but that's, I think, a unique consideration that Geneva has always included in their process, and so now it's specifically identified in the code that economics does play an issue. And then it further outlines the time frame for the commission making a decision. So, for instance, if there's a continuation of a case, or the information is all presented, but it's a voluminous amount of information, it does allow the commission to meet one more time and discuss that information or do some additional research to come to some conclusion. And if the commission can retract a request for a delay in demolition if they meet these three or four criteria. Let's see, it's three criteria, I believe. Two criteria. If somebody is making good faith, let's say the commission asks for a 120-day extension, and within 30 days the applicant has done due diligence, says, we have explored 16 different approaches, and the commission is satisfied they've done their due diligence, then it does allow for the commission to retract their request for 120 days, and they can vote to allow or not allow the demolition based on that finding. It does not have to extend the entire 120 days. And the commission can set anything between 0 and 120 days. It's not automatic that you have to always extend by 120 days. As part of the commission analysis, the ordinance now requires that staff go out and visit the site so that we can make a full finding of fact to the commissioners and bring full information back to you. And again, 7, 8, and 9 follow the procedures through the rest of the ordinance. Again, we allow for withdrawal, and under item 9, it's important to understand that the commission not only considers the demolition, but the commission may solicit expert testimony to evaluate the information provided. Again, recognizing that this is a commission of volunteers and the expertise is going to change from time to time, that sometimes information may be provided that's quite technical, and the commissioners may not have expertise in those areas, and so it does allow for the commission to seek expert technical advice to help understand some of the information applicants might bring forward. Let's see. I keep, and then city council action. Again, if the commission fails to approve the applicant's demolition request, or the applicant objects to the commission's determination, the applicant may request the Director of Community Development to have it appealed to the City Council. And again, we set out a time frame for the review, so it's not just open-ended. Again, the current ordinance does not put many time frames on things, so this really tightens up the process and the length of time that a case can be considered. And again, we're requiring any reversal of the commission's decision to require a 2/3 vote by the City Council. And again, during the time for a demolition request, any work is being suspended till the issue is determined, whether that's at the commission level or goes all the way to the City Council. And then, again, following the format of the ordinance, I've outlined the standards for demolition request review, so again, the commission knows exactly what its purview is and what factors it may be judging the demolition request upon. And then there is a demolition by neglect and deferred maintenance section that's been added to the ordinance. And so as part of a demolition by neglect provision, it requires that you also identify there is a duty to maintain and a duty to repair. That's been upheld in the courts, and so that's included in the information. And then identifies what is considered demolition by neglect, and identifies those components that can be evaluated as evidence of neglectful maintenance. And then recognizing that not all demolition is willful and wanton, that some of it is by natural destruction. We've included a paragraph to identify that, and that gives immediate approval for the demolition of unsafe structures is determined by joint consultation with the building official, fire department chief, chief of police, and the preservation planner. So it's not just one opinion, it's the opinion of 5 members of the city staff. That concludes that section.
All right, commission comments on? Nothing?
Well, no, of course not.
That's why I was
Sorry.
looking at you.
I know, but if I heard you correctly, this is an open-ended permit. It's not like the certificate of appropriateness where you've got 24 months. This one, once you get the demolition permit, it's good for all time. So if you don't get to it within 5 years, you can still demo the property.
That's probably a very good observation. That was probably an unintentional oversight. I would think that we should have a lapse of approval on this as well, because we have that throughout the rest of the ordinance.
Okay.
That is strictly an oversight that you caught.
Because I can remember distinct properties that we've issued permits for, or whatever we do, for, that have not been demolished. The other thing is, can we clarify that it's prepared by a licensed architect or structural engineer?
On what page are you on?
I'm on page number 36, section 2, item G.
Do you want it to be a registered or a licensed? Registered, right? Registered architect?
Registered, licensed, kind of 6 of one, half dozen of the other.
We're on 36.
So
The
under
state of
the-
Illinois.
Under the
Around
application
36, are you?
process, it does say that it requests a proposed schedule for demolition activities. So wouldn't that kind of fall, like wouldn't the applicant have to say when they're going to demolish the building?
They would say when they want to, but that doesn't
But it doesn't
necessarily
necessarily mean they're
say
gonna do it by
that's
then.
when they will,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, and then, I don't know how the rest of the commission feels, but the idea of the 120-day time period delay, that's 4 months. That seems kind of excessive to expect a homeowner to wait, or a property owner to wait so long I think that should be shortened up.
Well, again, the commission is not required to make 120 days. I would think it would be evaluated by the basis of the case, but in no case can it be longer than 120 days, which I think is fair to the other side of the argument. If somebody has a very complex project, they're not, I'm trying to say the redevelopment of the County Courthouse, a big building there. That's good. 4 months is not a very long time to evaluate alternatives. So you're not required to every time to give 120 days. That's the maximum the commission can ask for in a delay. So if you narrow it closer, you might get some projects that would be very, very hard to come up with the information because they're so complex.
I don't know if you put it in the ordinance, but typically we would say, come back in a month, do these 2 or 3 things, or look at these 3 things.
Yeah, but that would be something that would be then an incomplete application because they didn't provide all of the stuff we've asked for.
Right, but again, this is saying the maximum you can request a delay is 120. You could say, we're going to delay it for 30 days, we're going to delay it for 40 days, but I think you have to base on the scope of the project, but in no case can it be delayed more than 4 months.
I understand what you're saying. I still think it's too long. But again, I don't know what the rest of the commission thinks.
Any other comments from the commission on that?
I think, as Michael's been saying, it's all relative to the scope of the project. If you're just taking off a front porch, it's not a big deal, but if you're doing a multi-level structure, it could take you a significant amount of time before you can assess exactly how the project's going to go, and you may need that time to, and I don't think up to 4 months is ridiculous.
We've actually had some projects just in the last year that have been 6 or 7 months trying to gather the information.
Yeah, but that's before it gets to us.
Right.
So presuming that you have an application that's complete, not, we're
gotcha.
asking things to come back, then we can say, listen, 4 months from now, get back to us? It sounds like that's what it's saying, but I'm thinking, I know the building process a little bit,
Right.
and that puts me in a different season. It changes things significantly.
Well, if we give them up to 4 months, they can come back at any time before that, right?
Right.
Correct.
So, I think it's pretty reasonable.
And I agree with that.
There are, I don't remember which ordinance, but it's an Illinois ordinance. That ordinance gives them a delay up to 2 years. So I mean, it does vary widely. I've not seen anything less than 4 months that I'm recalling, and I didn't bring all my sample ordinances down. But I do know there's at least one, but I think there might even be 2 ordinances in Illinois that they can request delay up to 2 years.
Okay.
So I think this is again, it's not mandating that you make everybody wait 120 days. It's the maximum. So I think it's important for the applicant to know what their maximum timeframes are too when they're approaching us.
Oh, I agree. I just think it should be shorter. But,
Well, again, it spells out why we would want the extension,
Yeah.
we can't just delay it.
Okay.
There's got to be reasoning behind that. And again, that's probably based upon the scope. So, any other comments? Anything from the public?
Wait a minute, I have one quick thing. I don't know if I'm jumping from another section or if this is the place to put it. Is there any kind of a similar process for a conservation district? Demolition in a conservation district, or does that just go through the normal procedure?
All work within the conservation, when we get to that, and we'll talk about that more, is administrative.
I know that.
And we'll talk about that point, because I think it'll confuse it
Okay.
here, because it's a little different process for the conservation district. I think we need to understand the conservation district.
Okay. All right, anything from the public on demolition? Yes,
A question, should I?
sure, come on up and your name and address.
Adam Gibbons, 33W777 Hill Road, Geneva. Michael, I just wondered if you found any ordinances in other cities that had a provision for like architectural salvage or building material salvage, if that's impossible or if it exists anywhere, if you had a building that had a demo permit with sort of irreplaceable architectural features, and you could pick whatever example you like.
I can say I think it's close to 30 ordinances I've looked at, I didn't see any ordinance that required architectural salvage. I think that in most communities, that's left up to some of the not-for-profit groups or the salvage companies in the area to negotiate that with any demolition. I did not see as a requirement in any of the ordinances that I reviewed, and I've looked at a lot.
And it may be tough to define what that is,
That's why I asked.
you know. Okay, anything else from the public on demolition? Yes, come up.
Gail Ellenbaum, 707 Shady Avenue. I just want to clarify, and maybe you want to address or include or somehow or other, I know this is about historic preservation, and maybe it will be included under the Conservation District. So this section about demolition would not protect all of the demolition that's been occurring over the last several years, 10 years, Sunset Avenue, Dunham, Meadows, because it's not the historic district and they're not historic landmarks, correct?
Right. There's a
So it does
separate
not
process.
apply to this. Okay, that's what I thought. And so the only thing that would put any properties like that into this procedure would be to have it be designated a historic landmark before any application process.
Currently.
So that's what I thought I understood. So, if you're in the historic district, there's nothing in this ordinance that says also about, once demolition has been done, how long can that property be left vacant? After the Shady Cottage across from us was torn down, it's at 10 years. Empty, neglected, ratty. That's pretty hard on the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So it would be hard on a historic district or anywhere that's beautiful when you have these empty lots all over the place. It kind of gives a blighted appearance. So I'm wondering if you might want to add something about if they get a demolition permit and all of that, is there a time limit on when they should be then doing something with the property? So I don't know if you'd want to add that in.
The current demolition ordinance requires, I don't know your particular situation, but the demolition permit requires that if it's not, if construction activity doesn't occur within a certain number of months, I did not bring that with me, that the property must be seeded and filled and seeded with 70 pounds of perennial ryegrass. And that is in our demolition ordinance. And I know that because I just had to deal with that this
And
week.
it might
so.
be mowed every 6 months or so.
And that gets into code
And
enforcement.
it might have a lot of trash thrown in there, and it might have dogs walking in there, and it might have, meaning, you know, that's what happens when there's lots. I mean, that's just a natural thing. They might seed it, but then, so the letter of the law may be done, but in the long run, it isn't good for neighborhoods when you see these lots all over the place.
And I agree with you on that.
So I
think
don't
that's
know what you can do
beyond
about
the
that.
purview of the historic preservation, but what I'm saying is we have it covered in other aspects of the city code. So there is a process for filling lots and seeding them, and that's through the building division. And then if the property isn't being maintained, then that goes to the code enforcement officer, and we do talk back and forth with each other. So there have been times, and we have gotten complaints that the property has been being maintained in the historic district. Either the code enforcement officer contacts me, or I get a call and I contact the code enforcement officer, and then we work together to follow through on that. So
Even if it's nicely seeded and mowed, there's a point where there was a building there, and it feels like there needs to be a building there, and it's empty.
and that's
To have, say, from 1 year to the point of demolition, something should be happening there? Is there any way to add that in? I mean, I just think, it doesn't matter where the neighborhood is, it really matters when you have houses along a facade and then there's this open space that kind of looks odd.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help, I don't know, it's just something I'm concerned about.
I don't know how
I don't
you
know
would
what you can do.
mandate new construction to exist, because there's a lot of factors that are beyond the control of the Historic Preservation Commission, where they can get their, maybe they can't get their financing, maybe they can't get their plans approved, maybe,
Right.
you know. so
Maybe a
there's
recession happens, maybe.
Yes, so I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure how that would be integrated into this ordinance. I think it's better handled by some of the other
Some
departments.
other ordinance. But I think it should be, something has to happen.
And with respect, maybe I want my property to be vacant. You know, maybe that's the way I want
Told me
it.
it'd be part of the yard next door or something.
Right.
Yeah, that could
Or
be.
maybe I just own it, and that's the way I want it.
You got a comment, Colin? She stepped in front of you.
What?
Mr. Campbell wanted to speak.
And oh, I'm sorry. Did I step in front of him?
You did.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay,
While you're
and
up
I
here.
do want to echo somebody's comment here. It's very hard to hear you, sir, at all. And I'm in the front row here. Okay, to echo what Liz Safanda, 1013 Dunstan Road, to echo what Gail just said, I think that's a real concern, and now I can't quote it now because I didn't realize this would come up, but I believe it's in Hinsdale. I'm quite sure it is. The provision in their ordinance is they do not allow permission for demolition unless there is a approved plan for that property. So they do not, so in other words, you don't just have gratuitous demolition. Is that the case in Geneva, or is that not? No. And I think that should be looked into. So you just don't do what happened over on Shady, where the person comes in and tears that house down, and it was unsightly for a decade. And next to my house on Dunstan Road, they tore the house down, and there was a pit, and it was filled with water and mosquitoes for 2 years. Well, in the summer, not in the winter. Anyway, I think that's something, maybe that's not in the purview here, Michael, but it's something that even maybe down the road we could look into. Demolition should maybe be tied to a definite plan that you have going forward.
We'll look into that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
I would like to comment on that, just Liz, so that you are aware. The policy has been here in Geneva, long before I came here, that demolition is considered on its own merit and not related to what any new construction may or may not be following it. And I think that's a very important distinction for the Historic Preservation Commission to hang on to, because to tie it to new construction, we're not necessarily we're not a design review board. There are organizations, there are commissions that serve both as an architectural review board and as a historic preservation commission, but that's not the way this commission is set up. So we have been, and the commission can vouch for this, we've been very much continuing on the path of considering the demolition on its own merits and not tying it to any potential redevelopment of the site. If there's a desire to change that, that's a major policy shift, and I think that deserves a broader discussion.
May I make one more comment to that point? Okay. Michael, I agree with you that you shouldn't have design review considerations at all on that next step. I'm only talking about timing. You don't want to lose a landmark like that house on Shady that Gerard Keating was actually hoping to acquire and restore, but you don't want to lose that if there's no other project, a viable project that's going to occur. I'm not saying that you should make a judgment about the size or scope of that project. So I think it is something, anyway, something important
David
too.
wrote it down, so we'll.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Come on up.
Colin Campbell, 18 South 6th Street. Just a question about demolition and the application process. In the last few years, we have had several instances of a property owner wanting to demolish a building that was deemed historic in the historic district. And they have brought architects and engineers in to describe to you in great detail why that building is absolutely not salvageable. And in your wisdom, you have not granted, in 2 instances that I can remember, you have not granted the permit. And by golly, the buildings were salvageable. One of them is now Fiora's, the other is now the Pure Oil drive-through. Is there any way to, if there is an objection to a building demolition application, is there any way that you could build into the ordinance a provision for an independent review?
That is built into our ordinance now. That is the provision I was speaking of earlier, that the commission does have the right to get expert opinion. Again, if we're not sure the information is either accurate or that it's complete or that it's confusing to the commission, it's now within the purview of the commission to seek expert testimony to refute or to support what's been submitted.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on demolition? All right, the next one is very interesting, subdivision planning and zoning review process. Did you have a question on demolition? Okay, come on up.
I'd just like to say that I agree with Liz. It's nice to agree with you sometimes, Liz. I think that it really makes sense if you're going to tear down a house, whether it is perceived as historic or not, that you should have a plan. And it may not be within the scope of this commission, but somewhere in the city, David, you can find a way that can be addressed. And
Yeah, 'cause there's a demolition component to the code also. There's a non-historic preservation commission demolition in the code, right?
Well, if it's outside of the historic district or it's not a landmark property, it's the property owner's right.
Yeah,
to
you have a
demolish the
procedure
property. We have a
already.
permit requirement, and we're making sure utilities are shut off and that the property's fenced and trees are being protected, et cetera. But it is a by right permit.
Right.
Then a question on what Gail was saying. I'm not sure I totally understood it. Outside of the historic district, on Sunset or Meadow Road, if somebody applies for demolition, can somebody else then come in and apply for historic preservation in making it a landmark?
Technically, yes. Is the timing possible? Probably no, because of our implementation requirement for a pre-application meeting and notification now, which was not part of our current ordinance. So technically, someone could come in and make a request. Whether or not it went anywhere would be, again, the way the timing is set up, we have to react much quicker than we have to under the present ordinance with notifying owners and the fees and potential fees start being incurred. So technically, yes, somebody could apply for a demolition permit, and 2 hours later, could somebody walk in with an application? Yes, but the demolition process for a non-historic building is already in process, and we'd most likely be advising the applicant that, you can try to continue with this, but you're really behind the 8 ball at this point, and that would have to be that applicant's decision.
So
whether
what
they move forward.
happened at, I think it was 946 Sunset, that couldn't happen again with the new ordinance?
Well, the time on that was different. The application, well, I know there's maybe some discrepancies in the timing of how things got submitted or whatever, but at the time that the landmark nomination was submitted, there was not a complete building permit or demolition request on file.
Because of the holdup in getting that permit?
Yeah, I don't know all the details on the building side, but that's why that timing is a little bit different than the scenario we were just talking about.
I won't take further time, but I'm still not clear on what that protection is to keep that from happening, but.
We'll get.
I was just gonna say, we'll be getting to designating landmarks and historic districts.
So we can talk about demolition then. All right. So you want to talk about subdivision and?
I really don't have a lot to say about subdivision. It's again, the same language that's been in the existing ordinance, and that is really just dovetailing what the Historic Preservation Commission does in with the subdivision zoning process. So,
Can you give us an example of what that, is Dodson Place, does that fit into this?
Dodson Place could be an example. Any planned unit development subdivision that's in the historic district that requires both the Historic Preservation Commission's review and the Plan Commission's review would go to the Historic Preservation Commission first for their review, and then your recommendation would feed in to the recommendation that the Plan Commission then makes to the City Council.
And I think that's what Dodson Place was. So you had accumulation of stuff, and then they developed a PUD out of that, and then from there, then we got into the review process.
a recent case would be the 7th Street Terraces at 7th and James.
yeah.
That's exactly what this is.
That came
It's really
before
just
the,
clarifying the timeline,
right,
who goes first.
right.
All right, any comments on this, from the commission? Public, anyone want to talk about subdivision? All right. Next item is 10-6-13, economic hardship.
Economic hardship is one of the significant.
What page does that start
I'm sorry, it
on?
starts on page 43, 48.
43.
Economic hardship is one of the significant elements that's missing from our ordinance. We have no provision for somebody to, who is unable to complete the work that the commission is either asking for or requesting, to appeal that process based on sheer economic issues. So this mirrors the economic hardship language. It's in just about every Illinois ordinance that has economic hardship. There's nothing that I've creatively authored here. So this is lifted from a majority of ordinances. The process of economic hardship has been tested by the Illinois Supreme Court, and so the requirements for proving economic hardship are founded in case law here in Illinois. So again, it's nothing that's been invented. What I've done is simply organized it to match the process for the rest of the ordinance that we've laid out. So that, again, it's a very parallel ordinance. Again, we've set out requirements for notification. Again, for property owners within 350 feet of the affected property. We've identified a time frame that keeps it as tight as we think is possible with staff time and requirement for public notice. And it identifies what elements the commission can review and can seek to make a determination. Again, under item 8, those A through J are straight out of what's been tested in the courts and all found to be reasonable requests to make an economic determination. And then it allows the commission to provide a certificate of economic hardship. Now, there is no lapse of approval on this because to make a lapse of approval based on a calendar year does not necessarily mean that the economic conditions would change. So that is intentionally omitted in this section. And the commission can only grant a certificate of economic hardship if the hardship was not created with the intent of circumventing this article, this provision. And then the commission has to find one of 3 standards that are on page 46 and 47. The subject cannot be put to reasonable beneficial use. The owner of record will suffer a substantial economic loss if the proposed work that will yield a certificate of appropriateness is not approved. And the retention of the resource will cause undue financial hardship to the owner of record when a governmental action, act of God, or other event beyond the owner's control creates the hardship, and all feasible alternatives to limit the economic hardship have been attempted and exhausted by the owner of record. Again, it requires the commission makes a finding of facts within 45 days, which allows for one additional meeting to consider facts and to absorb any information that's provided under testimony. And again, we do not allow for work to continue until the issue is resolved, again, following the same action. And then again, it outlines the city council's responsibility to review the work on the same basis of, or the economic hardship request on the same basis that the commission looks at the same facts, and then does require a 2/3 vote of the city council to overturn our action.
Okay.
And then it simply identifies the findings of fact must be related to one of 4 or 5 conditions. So again, it's following the same parallel arrangement of the rest of the ordinance, outlining the process and the requirements and what the review authority is.
Okay. Any comments from the commission? Economic hardship?
No.
Any comments from the public? Economic hardship? All right, let's go to 10-6-14, violations and penalties. It's pretty short, right?
Violation and penalty is very short, and it is just identifying, again, typical language of this city ordinance that if anybody guilty of this is guilty of a misdemeanor, it's not a felony, it's a misdemeanor, and they can be punished by fine as set forth in other parts of the city code. So, and the other thing, and this language hasn't changed, each day that the violation exists can be deemed a separate offense. That is not a determination of this commission. If it went to a court of law, it would be the judge determining how many days in violation a case was and set the fine based on that. This gives a framework for a judge to make a judgment.
Okay, what happens if, specifically demolition, where it's, I mean, you can't undemo something?
Typically, what has happened is courts will find, they will set a fine based on what they feel the loss was and how many days. I mean, it's not going to be into infinity.
So it's not a per day thing in that instance?
Correct. He'll use this as the base of the judgment, but then he's going to say, you know, it's X amount for the fine. That's typically what's happening in Illinois case law.
Okay, any comments from the commission?
No.
Comments from the public? Yes. You give your name? and
David
address.
Shepard, 117 North Fifth Street. Is there any way to address some additional penalties or put something into the guidelines that address people who over a period of time are deliberately devaluing and destroying the architectural character of the property? I can give you a specific example of the house at the corner of 6th and Ford. It's now vacant, and over time the owner systematically would buy a window on odd sizes, tear out the windows that were in the house, board up around the side of the window, and stick in a little tiny window in the middle of a frame behind lots of shrubbery that was never taken care of. The house is now vacant, probably owned by the bank. But it's a methodical change over time, repeated. Every time you walk by it, over years, there would be more changes, things that were done. You've got to have a mechanism when you've got somebody that's on a course of action that's deliberately deteriorating a property within the historic district, and not allowing this deterioration to impact the entire neighborhood. A simple ordinance, you give them a fine, they ignore you, they go away. We've had repeatedly, if you go down by Stevens Street and you see house after house along there where they've put aluminum siding on, never bothered to come in for any type of a permit. They're just, all of a sudden they've re-sided the house for vinyl or whatever, and it looks very nice and probably looks better than it did before, but certainly not in accordance. And yet nobody is out there levying any fines, nobody is raising any conflict, saying, hey, wait a minute, what you're doing is not appropriate. We're just kind of a wink and a nod and go along with it and just ignore it. And I don't have any specific suggestions, but how do you put teeth to give you the capacity to, I don't know, issue cease and desist orders or to seek them out, junctions stopping people from, and you have a wonderful section in here under demolition that you've just gone over through neglect. That's a perfect example where we as a community allowed a homeowner to deliberately negate a property over a period of time without taking any action, and now we're faced with a property that probably will need to be torn down because it's probably beyond salvage. But we've brought it on ourselves. We've not taken corrective action. My frustration.
I can't address that. I can't speak for anything before I was here. But I can say within the last 2 years, since I've been here, our code enforcement officers and our building inspectors are routinely bringing things to my attention, and we go out and look at it, and if need be, if it's a violation of something in our code, they do get a letter from the code officer to cease and desist the action. We've also had calls from neighbors who said, maybe you don't know what's going on here, and in a case where they've put in smaller windows, we've had some examples where neighbors have called and said, you know, so-and-so replaced a window, and we go out and look at it and find out that it doesn't meet code. And so then it has been dealt with. That's been my experience in the 2 years I've been here. So I think we have a lot of eyes out there looking. And like I said, it's not just our own staff. We do have residents who call in and say, you know, this was done at 2 o'clock in the morning. Maybe you didn't see it this week. Could somebody go drive by? And then our code enforcement officer does try to work with them. And if it's a historic, if it's in the historic district or a landmark building, oftentimes he gets me involved and we sit down and meet with the owner. And we've done that on at least 4 different cases that I can recall in the 2 years I've been here. And in some cases, it gets into a hardship issue where they've done the work and they can't afford to undo it, but we can stop them from not going any further. So it's not a perfect solution, perhaps, but I don't want to leave with the impression that nobody's watching. I don't think you can believe the number of eyes and the number of people that are reporting things to us on a regular basis. I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but
But what can be stronger than just a misdemeanor?
Well, again, that is going to be a legal issue, and I can run that by our city attorney, but there's only so far that you can go with the enabling legislation in Illinois as to our ability to levy fines. There may be something, again, I don't deal with the code enforcement, I know there's a whole adjudication process, and I couldn't begin to be the one to explain that to you, but when it does go through the code enforcement officer, it goes through another whole process.
Our primary objective when we get the code enforcement officer involved is to get compliance, not to find the property owner and create another hardship for them to overcome to correct the action. But if we're not getting compliance after a few month period of time, if it's clear we're not going to get it, we will take it to the adjudication and have the hearing officer make a decision and determine the appropriate fines.
So call them. When you see it, call them.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, the next item that we're going to go back kind of toward the beginning, we're going to look at 10.6.4, review standards for historic properties. And that's on, it starts on, the title is on page 7. The actual text starts on page 8.
Yes. The review standards for historic properties, again, is a section that's in our existing ordinance. It identifies the Secretary of Interior standards for rehabilitation, which are the 10 standards that we have employed here for many, many years. It is further clarified with the addition of 8 items that tie back into our design guidelines and tie into putting the Secretary of Interior standards into kind of everyday language for people to understand what those architectural features are that we're talking about being impacted with the Secretary of Interior standards. I found this in several ordinances, thought it was a good idea, because in having many meetings with different builders and property owners, they say, okay, we understand you follow these guidelines, but what do they mean to my project? And so I think these 8 items kind of narrow it down or clarify what parts of the building we're looking at in particular in our reviews. So the standards for review for historic landmarks or historic district properties are enumerated in the first 2.5 pages of the ordinance, and again, they're by and large what we're doing today, with the addition of those 8 architectural elements. It also, since 1995, the commission has done a lot of work, and so we have identified in the last paragraph under the historic district that the commission not only can use the Secretary of Interior standards, but also our preservation plan that's been adopted and our design guidelines. Okay. So those are enumerated in the code now.
Do we need to go through all of it, or since it's mostly what we've already had?
Point by point, I was not going to go through it point by point, but if the commission would
Keep
like me
going.
to, I mean, it's what we've been using. We can answer any specific details or what have you. The standards for review for a conservation district property, this will probably make more sense once we discuss conservation districts. But the purpose there for conservation districts, and I'm going to jump ahead just a little bit, is that conservation districts are a type of district that has been utilized across the country and with greater frequency, because the districts typically won't meet the higher standards of a historic district. Maybe there's a lot of aluminum siding in the district. Maybe there's been some additions that wouldn't be considered sensitive in a historic district, but they're still not really harming the architectural character. They just wouldn't be in the placement that we would prefer in a historic property. The idea behind conservation districts are to let, to assist areas that may be declining or may not be improving in values, but that may potentially have historic significance in the community, to be rehabilitated towards the historic standards, but not necessarily comply with them completely. So it does allow for a different level of materials and what have you. The two primary purposes lie behind conservation districts. One is it's an educational opportunity on behalf of the commission and on behalf of the community to encourage elements that won't make the neighborhood more fragmented architecturally or aesthetically. The second purpose is that in many communities, conservation districts are used as a stepping stone towards helping neighbors or neighborhoods that might desire to have historic status, but they don't meet the standards for historic district. So it's an opportunity to individually consult with properties at a less demanding level to help them make decisions that may not adversely affect the buildings in the long run. It doesn't mean that they have to follow the strict standards of the Secretary of Interior standards, but if they're thinking of putting, say, asphalt shingle, they have an asphalt shingle roof, and they are thinking of re-roofing it, and they come in and would like to put a sheet metal roof on it from one of your local builder stores, we would have the opportunity to talk to them and say, you know, would you consider asphalt shingles, because that's more keeping in line with the character of the house, et cetera. So it's really in an attempt to try to protect the historic character of a community and allow areas to be rehabilitated. We have had some inquiries of some areas. Why this is included in here is back in 2002. The commission engaged a study of what was called the Northwest Edition and looked at whether or not that could be a National Register district. The consultant came back and said that there were too many issues architecturally with the area to qualify for a historic district, but it would qualify as a conservation district, but there's no mechanism right now in our ordinance to provide for that kind of designation. There are areas in other parts of the town that people have come to us and asked us about whether or not they could be a historic district, and we have looked at the area and said that there are architectural or other issues with the area that they would not qualify for the strict interpretation of a historic district. So what I've done is outlined, again, the standards for review, and these would be done administratively. And with the only cases coming before the commission is if somebody disagreed with a recommendation the staff made and wanted to appeal it to a higher authority. Okay? And again, this is in response to a recommendation that was made 12 years ago, and there's no process to follow through with that. Are there other?
So any commission comments on the review process or review standards? Pretty much doing this already. That's the way we're looking at it. So, anything from the public? Would like to talk about how we review, what we review, what we don't review. All right, let's go to the next section, which is 10-6-5. Historic landmarks and historic districts.
Historic landmarks and districts, this section existed.
What page is that?
That's on page 12.
Page 12.
It's an existing section in the ordinance that really just introduces the idea of historic landmarks and districts, so it's really a procedural kind of a preface or preamble to the next sections.
Okay.
Don't really have much more to say about it.
All right, any questions on this from the commission?
Where, I know I've read it, but where do you introduce the concept of the historic or the conservation district?
It will follow in
In
3
8.
sections.
Okay, thank you.
6-8. Any comments from the public on?
Wait.
Okay.
On page 14,
Come back, that's the next section.
oh, wrong section again?
You're gonna have to-
Yep.
We're right there.
Sorry.
All right. Anything from the
jumping
public
ahead.
Never
on?
mind.
All right, let's continue on page 12, historic landmark designation, 10-6-6.
This is a redrafting of an existing section in the current ordinance. And what we have done is we have rewritten and reordered this to provide a clarified procedure, again, in line with the format I followed through the entire ordinance. What we have done is we have itemized the information that's required as part of a complete application. We've identified the fees that are the responsibility of the applicant, filing requirements, and a schedule for staff review. We also have inserted a requirement for a timely notification of the owner of a proposed landmark. We've included withdrawal of an application, timeliness of the review, which in this ordinance is an overall reduction in review time compared to what the current ordinance allows. And then we also require a supermajority approval of both the commission and the city council for properties that are nominated without owner consent. There is a requirement also for suspension of work while the application is considered. And we also have a procedure for when a reapplication is allowed following a denial by this commission, which is absent from our current ordinance. We also have a procedure for allowing amendments and the process for amending an application following approval. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, but there are cases where there are unintentional errors in a application, or perhaps it's a property somehow said there were 5 buildings associated on the property, and actually there were only 4, and and it somehow got missed in a review. So it allows for minor amendments, but if it's major amendments, there's another process for that. And then it also discusses the process of rescinding a landmark designation, which we have no process for that at this point. And also then the standards for review. So very quickly, going through this section, we have the same provisions for the application, that it's any resident, property owner, group of persons or association, or the Historic Preservation Commission on its own initiative are the approved applicants. The application must be made on forms made by the commission. The fees, excluding the owner of record when acting on its own initiative, the applicant is required to pay an application deposit and shall bear all costs and pay all fees associated with the application designation process. This mirrors the zoning procedure where we collect a deposit to hear the case. We've identified that costs and fees shall include direct expenses, such as, but not limited to, postage, copying, transcription services, and/or legal representation. The deposits and fees shall be set by the city council, so we are not part of that process. And deposits and fees may also include the costs for public notice, publication, certified mail, which is already a responsibility of the applicant, recordation and transcription of public meetings or hearings, attorney fees, and/or staff time. The historic application, landmark designation rather, is to be filed with the preservation planner. And at the time of filing, we are to be provided with a list of the property owners within 350 feet of the limits of the property. And I want to pull out that 350 and talk about that a little bit here. The old ordinance said 250 feet plus the rights-of-way. and that is confusing a lot of applicants, so in talking at the staff level, we just simplified it to 350 feet. And that makes it a little clearer for everybody, again, trying to make this as clear as possible. We put a requirement for a review of the application within 10 working days, and identifying that if there are any deficiencies, and making an automatic withdrawal of the application if the applicant fails to make any of those modifications of the deficiency within 15 working days. Again, so that process can't be hanging out there indefinitely.
So you look at it for 10 days, and then you find deficiencies, the applicant has 15 days after you let them know?
Correct. And again, to realize that at my current work schedule, 10 working days can be anywhere from just 3 to 4 days of my contact here with the city of Geneva. So, then what is new here in the order of notice, and this has come out of several of the comments that we have received here at City Hall, is that within 5 working days of the filing of an application, whether or not the application is deemed complete, and that's very important, the preservation planner shall notify the owner of record of the property considered for designation as a historic landmark, except when the application is the owner of record. So therefore, if a property is being nominated by somebody who's not the owner, without owner consent, there is a responsibility of staff to notify that owner in a timely fashion, and not until the application is complete. Right now, the current process is that until the application is complete, we're not bound to notify anybody. And so this is an attempt to make notification happen very early in the process.
So potentially, you've got a 25-day process, but within the first 5 days of that process, the owner is going to know.
Correct. Again, the next few paragraphs are about just notification per law. And that we'll mail the notices out 10 days prior to the public hearing. As staff, I'll be preparing an analysis, as I have done in the past. That's not anything new. There will be a public hearing for consideration of the landmark designation. The withdrawal by the applicant can occur within at least 72 hours preceding the scheduled public hearing, and if an applicant should withdraw, their incurring of fees ceases at that moment of withdrawal. So that allows us, in the case, to post proper meeting notices of a cancellation of a meeting or a case on the agenda. Again, the owners of record of the subject property, as well as other interested parties, are allowed to make testimony at the public hearing. The commission is entitled to solicit expert testimony when warranted. And a public hearing may be continued to a date certain in the event that the commission determines that additional information unavailable at the public hearing is warranted and necessary for the purpose of making a finding of fact. Again, not allowing the commission to extend it indefinitely, but to a date certain for a specific purpose, not just because the commission may or may not like the landmark request, but they can seek a continuance for cause. And that again may be, and we've had this with some cases where a commissioner will tell us something that none of us knew about a property. You all certainly know Geneva better than I do. I'm getting to know it pretty well, but every once in a while you'll bring up something that's been missed and question why that wasn't included or why that wasn't brought forward in the case. Again, the commission has to make findings of fact within 45 days. This tightens up the schedule that's in the current ordinance, and that allows, again, for information to be gathered and testimony to be made, and then allow for a chance for you to absorb and do some other research and fact-finding on your own or as a commission, and then bring back to another meeting and make a decision. But it does not allow it to continue unencumbered. And then, following the commission's action, it goes to the city council. Again, they have 60 days, allowing them to do their proper due diligence as well. Again, following the procedure that we've had throughout the rest of the ordinance, there's no, the work must stop. Any work proposed or any new work proposed is not allowed to be undertaken while the application is under consideration. If the application for a historic landmark is denied by the city council or withdrawn by the application at any time, no application for historic landmark designation of the same improvement, property, or site may be made within 12 months of the date of the denial or withdrawal. So, again, in a worst-case scenario, if a property was being nominated without owner consent, the property would not be subjected to one neighbor or an interested citizen in the Geneva filing an application, and that one is denied, so someone comes the next week and files them. That eliminates that possibility. It would remove that possibility for up to 12 months or more. Again, allowing for amendments to a landmark designation that are minor. If it's minor defects in the landmark, maybe there's a misspelling that's discovered, whatever, that can be handled administratively. If it's material relating to either procedures or some other fact, then it comes back before the commission to be heard and see if that material change makes a difference. So, for instance, if someone said this was the Thomas Edison house here, and everybody voted on making a landmark because they thought it was associated with Thomas Edison, it comes back and finds out that it was Timothy Edison and had nothing to do with electricity, that sort of thing would come back to the commission. Rescinding of a designation, again, it just clarifies that a designation could be rescinded, but it follows the same process of fact-finding as actually landmarking. So it's requiring a public hearing, it's requiring a finding of fact, and those facts would have to be substantially different than what the finding of facts were in when the landmark was so designated.
And it's the same process?
Yes. So there'd be a public hearing and notice and noticing of the neighboring properties. So the standards for designation of historic landmarks are identified. There's 5 standards that must be met. And this, again, is where I'll point out that I've changed this from 30 years to 50 years, again, lining up with what the National Park Service is recommending. And this basically is following the criteria that's laid out in the National Register of Historic Places. They've got 4 criteria here. There are 7. So I think those are self-explanatory, but if you want, I can run through each one of them and explain them.
Okay.
So that is the process for historic landmark designation.
Okay. Comments from the commission on this?
Yes. The fees situation.
Which page is that on?
Page 13, number 2, fees.
Okay.
Michael, I think you said something about the fees are mirroring the zoning process? Okay. So that means that these are customary fees that are already, these are not new fees, these are customary fees for a person who is asking for a zoning change on their property. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. What our current ordinance says is that, and it's vague as to what the costs are, and we've tried to identify them here. The current ordinance states that an applicant already is responsible for paying fees, costs and fees, but it doesn't identify what those things might be. It will be different in every case. In some cases, even if it's, it could be a case where there's, again, going to a non-owner consent that the owner doesn't object to it, just never thought about landmarking their property. There may not be any, excessive fees or what have you. There may be a case where somebody nominates a property, like when Burbank Labs was done, that there might be some objections, there might be some costs. So it's a kind of a applicant beware and know what you're nominating, and know what you might be opening yourself up to. So it is kind of a cautionary fee.
When you state legal representation, does that mean the legal representation the city would have, or would that be or the commission would have, or
For the applicant.
the applicants?
It would be any and all,
It would,
correct?
yeah,
It would be any, even if the owner wanted to hire a lawyer to represent him, would that be covered
I think it would be any fees incurred by the city.
by the city? Okay.
Again, looking at this and some other ordinances and talking with some other professionals in the field, I think to suggest that it would extend to the owners.
I'm just trying to
legal
clarify,
representation
I'm just
would
trying
be
to
another
clarify
case
what it
outside
was.
of the city's jurisdiction.
So it's just cost to the city to go through this process.
Correct.
Okay.
The total time from application to designation now is much shorter than it previously was.
Correct.
Do you have any idea, can you give us a range?
Yeah, if everything goes correctly.
If everything goes correctly, and that's one thing I did not write down for you tonight, Al. You always ask me the question I don't write down, but it is approximately, and I have this on my desk upstairs. It's about 105 to 120 days. So that would be the maximum.
And these are calendar days, not working days?
Working days.
120 working days.
And before it was, you don't really know.
It was open-ended. There wasn't a,
Yeah, there were milestones, but there weren't necessarily timeframes for the milestones.
correct.
That's good. Okay, and I have one other issue that I just it struck me, and I'm not sure if I'm reading it right or not. On number 11, that's page 21, I guess. The reapplication following denial or withdrawal of an application. Could someone apply then withdraw to circumvent the process?
It would be the applicant withdrawing.
Well, but that's what it says. If the applicant withdraws, oh, okay.
Then they still have 12.
Well, could I apply, yeah, but, so I apply. I don't want to mess with landmarking on my building, so I apply, and then I withdraw it. And now nothing can happen for a year.
I suppose you could do that.
I'm just being devious. I mean, I'm saying,
You could do that.
So you could circumvent the process with that clause?
Sure.
Okay.
I now know how you think.
I have a question.
Can we fix that?
I don't know how you would,
I don't know how you would fix it.
that's a,
Okay, so, wait.
Well,
Jennifer had a question.
No, it's okay. Are you still in regards to, yeah?
So what are you saying here, Al?
well,
Strategically, try to landmark your own property and then
And
you
then
withdraw
withdraw
it. And another application cannot be filed for another 12 months.
so every 12 months you have a rolling apply and then withdraw,
So you're
So then it
blocking
would
somebody
never
else
get-
from,
ever doing it.
you had mentioned earlier that there, or I thought you had mentioned earlier that a pre-application meeting is going to be required for a historic landmark designation. I thought you had mentioned that to this gentleman. And I didn't see it in here, so I didn't know if I just heard wrong
Is
or,
that just the first 10 days or?
Good question.
We have a pre-application meeting required for demolition, but we do not have a pre-application meeting required. Here, what we do is we require when an application is submitted,
So do you want to,
so if that's a design that's easily,
Yeah, I
I'm
think,
just wondering if it would be, there seems to be a lot of concern about notifying the property owner. And I'm wondering if a pre-application meeting with the applicant and the property owner would be appropriate, or even just a pre-application meeting with the applicant, so you know ahead of time kind
and
of
maybe to
what's
go
going
through
on.
that application one-on-one rather than here's my 20-page application, I walk away and you have to,
And we do that now, so that's why I say it's really, that's, I think, a very good idea. It's an unintended omission again, but I think that that would be a very wise thing to add in here.
okay.
It would give you the opportunity to counsel the applicant in the event that perhaps that's not a wise thing to do.
Well, and it also, even in someone who might think they have a building that would qualify as a landmark, instead of having them go through the process of putting that together, we maybe say, it doesn't meet these criteria. If you want to proceed, and that's the same thing the National Register does, they won't tell you can't apply,
Right.
but they will tell you if they believe you're going to meet the criteria with your nomination. So I think that's a good point to add.
That's actually, during the period beginning with the filing of it, you have to notify the owner at the filing of the application within 5 days. I think the notification should be moved up to the from the point of the pre-application, that someone's interested in doing that.
I think there's some good points to that, but the other issue would be that, and again, I'm looking at it from, say, a very weak
Application.
application that doesn't have any merit to it.
Lighting a fire.
I think you're lighting a fire that, if I were a homeowner, I'd be like, well, now, why did you just waste my time if that was going to be, if it didn't even go anywhere? But, again, if that's what the commission thinks is appropriate.
I think you would know, maybe, I don't know if you can bump it up. I mean, 5 days is not a long period of time, but.
But it might be nice even if you know that the applicant is going to pursue it, even after you've counseled them not to or whatever, to just let the property owner know. I do a lot of consultation for my job, and the earlier somebody's notified, the more comfortable they feel with the process, and the more included they feel.
Well, and that's why it says within 5, it doesn't say you wait to the 5th day.
Right.
It could be the very
Oh, yeah,
first-
I know, and you're only here.
And the other thing to consider, again, but the other thing I want to remind everybody is I'm only here part-time, so there are
Right.
things that come in when I'm not here.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's why if you have that in person, rather than me dropping off this on a Friday and you're not here on Monday, so now we're 2 days into the process before you even have a chance to look at it. Maybe it starts with that pre-application meeting that you notify them.
And quite frankly, as a property owner, I would want to know if anything was being discussed about my property before, well, any time.
I would agree with that. I mean, that's where it comes from. It's like, I don't want to be out of left field 5 days into a process, someone come up and say, by the way, we've decided to try to get your house designated.
So I think to fix that timing schedule thing is, it's pretty quick after the meeting, the in-person meeting. Not when it's submitted, but after you've met.
And it may be even beneficial to the applicant because the property owner may be really interested in
Yeah,
doing
may
it and
not
have a lot
be,
of
may not have
information.
known the
you know.
potential.
And it could very well be, yeah.
So, with that, I mean, think about that, how to,
Or if there's some problems with this that we haven't thought about. But as I said, as a property owner, I would want to know
Sooner
for
rather than later.
transparency.
well, and I agree with that. It's just that I do know, as a general practice, we get a lot of inquiries on properties here.
Right.
On a day-to-day basis that are absolutely going nowhere.
well, that's
Right,
why,
but
But I understand what you're saying.
It's
I'll
to
get that in there.
level of
I mean, if you tie it to a meeting,
pre-application.
not the application.
Right. I have no problem with that. I'm just saying, like I said, we get a lot of inquiries on a lot of properties that absolutely go absolutely nowhere. And if I'm just thinking of one property in particular, there's been a lot of activity on the last 30 or 40 days. If I called that property owner every time that somebody inquired on that property, they'd get sick of hearing from me. I think that's an extreme case, but I just want you to know that it's surprising how many calls we get on certain properties.
Yeah, but I mean, if just like when they come to you and say, okay, I want to fill out this application, and then you have that pre-application meeting at that point, instead of, entertaining
I think that's
100
fine.
different phone
I
calls.
have no problem with that.
I think it's important to have both in the ordinance, though, because there's always the possibility that an applicant comes in with a complete application, no need for a pre-application meeting, knows that the owner is not going to consent, and does not want to give that owner the notice, and staff wouldn't be none the wiser. So I think there's not always that opportunity for a pre-application meeting. When we do have pre-application meetings, we always strongly encourage owner consent. That's been our policy. So I think
Maybe
that
Can
notice
someone
is
just
as early as possible.
Can someone just download the form from the internet, or does Michael have to give them the paperwork?
It's all available online.
It is, okay.
So kind of talk about that as staff, between now and the 10th. And okay, other comments from the commission?
Yeah, in the section on filing,
Still page 13.
yeah, on page 13. Michael, you comment here that, let's see, what is it? That the applicant needs to prepare a list along with the addressed envelopes, appropriate postage, blah, blah, blah. What do you envision the process for an ordinary citizen to do to complete this requirement?
I'm not sure I understand the question. What?
Well, okay, if
Practically,
I
what do they
need,
do?
if I need to find the names, the phone numbers, and the addresses of the owner of record of all the properties within 350 feet of the property that I am interested in nominating for landmarking, how would I go about that?
That is actually make a trip over to the county recorder's office.
So you'd have to get it from public records?
And that's
It's
typical in the
online.
zoning. It's
Yeah,
what-
that happens in zoning review.
Zoning does that too?
Zoning does that too. It's
And
not
they're
a,
used to that request.
I see, okay. All right, thank you.
Did you want to go, Paul?
I just, on the suspension of work, during the period of, beginning with the filing of the application, it says you can't do anything to your home, and it doesn't say anything about a pre-existing, to this gentleman's, a pre-existing process that the permit's already been issued. It seems to me that if a permit has been issued, that it shouldn't stop an existing permit. Because if that's the case, you can get capricious people coming in saying, I'm going to file this thing, and it doesn't say that it has to be a valid filing, it just has to be filed. Not that anyone would do that sort of thing, but that,
Al would.
yeah, I know, against my property, but that's okay. And maybe we're just
See, I see
overthinking
your
it.
point. That's very standard language in these provisions for suspension of work. It begins with the filing. I'm glad to entertain other language.
And I just wonder if you're putting an addition and maybe part of the building is open now and, I mean, you're right in the middle of something. Maybe you haven't finished, but you may
we
be in a
wouldn't-
state where you really can't stop construction.
And
Well,
it's
it
an
might be
economic
very-
hardship also. I
It
mean,
might very well be easy enough to put in here that no unpermitted exterior architectural work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That would recognize the point that you're looking at.
Yeah.
I think that's a valid
That's
point.
fair. Or non-permitted. We'll get the right word in there.
Okay.
That's a good point.
Go ahead. All done, Paul?
I'm done.
Okay. We've already discussed that we're going to define the group of persons and associations better.
Yes.
So I'm not going to go into that. In the notice area, section 4, page 14, in addition to a newspaper or general circulation, blah, 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 how about we post it on our website and bring it into the 21st century?
Oh, yeah, can you send out like
A email
an
blast.
email blast like they do with the
Well, I don't know that you have to go to that extreme, but it should be digitally on there somewhere.
Well, I mean, the city of Geneva just sends out Geneva alerts on your email.
Really?
Mm-hmm. You can sign up for them.
Wouldn't we need the attorney to look at that? Because aren't there a certain requirement we have to?
These are the minimum requirements that goes above and beyond, but I don't see a reason why we couldn't have a section of our website that list public hearings where we put these public notices as well.
But, and put it into the ordinance that, in addition to the newspaper, that it goes into the website. And that would also be, down further where, at the last paragraph, there's something about a newspaper, notice. Then the other part, I'm gonna come back to something, but, under section 9 with the city council action,
That's page 15.
I'm actually on page 16, so I'm at the top.
Okay.
Where they're talking about how upon designation, you have to do a bunch of stuff.
Yes, that's in the current ordinance. That's the requirement to file it and record it in Geneva. That's in the ordinance now.
Upon designation as a historic
Upon
landmark
designation,
by the city council, a notice of designation will be sent by the city clerk to the applicant and owner of the improvement property or site, and copy of the ordinance effectuating the designation shall be recorded with the appropriate county recorder of deeds and the appropriate township assessor. That section. Is that the same thing as putting a lien on the title?
It's not a lien on the title,
No.
but it's recording it on the title.
So it's recorded on the title somewhere
Yeah.
that this is a historic property?
Correct.
Okay. Because I know that we've done that for properties within the historic district, and I just want to make sure we've got it codified.
Yes, this is the exact language that we're currently using. It's still valid.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
Then, this is a question, to become a historic landmark,
So where are you at?
No, you're
On what-
I'm sorry, I'm back on page 15, item number 8, commission action.
Okay.
In order for the landmark designation to be approved by the commission, you need a simple majority.
Correct.
Okay. Everywhere
Except
else,
for,
I'm sorry?
except for, in the case of an application for historic landmark designation for a property nominated without owner consent, the commission may forward a recommendation for district of the city council only upon a 2/3 majority or greater vote in favor of designation.
Right. So if the owner is the person making the application and there is consent, or there is consent, you only require a simple majority.
Right.
But everywhere else in the ordinance, I've seen a 2/3 majority. So in other words, if there's no consent, if they go to the city council,
No, where you've seen 2/3 so far in the discussion tonight is if the city council chooses to overturn any decision that the HPC has made, that has required 2/3. You'll find that in the application process, consistent through the next two sections we'll be looking at, 2/3 vote by the commission and the council is only required in non-owner consent issues. So it's where the council is either overturning or having to deal with an appeal based on an owner consent issue.
I'm wondering if we shouldn't have the initial designation be 2/3 as well, to be consistent, but also, this is, I mean, a designation is a pretty big thing. I mean, if you can't convince 5 or 4 of the 7 people that it should be designated,
5 of the 7.
5 of the 7 people, that it should be designated, should it really be designated? Because you get a lot of benefits from having a designated landmark. There's tax benefits, there's all sorts of things going on. So I'm wondering if that shouldn't be 2/3 as well as the other parts too.
To make it consistent.
Well, I think just for the landmark status though, right?
Just for the landmark status.
Because you want a high hurdle to get over to get it,
One more person, yes.
one more person.
You can do that. My concern is this, and it is, again, in reading way too much law that I did not study to be a lawyer, but one of the cautions, and I've got several of them right here, several of the things that have been written on the legality of preservation ordinance and keeping your ordinance out of court is that they mirror the same general zoning provisions or zoning process that your municipality has. And we do not require, and correct me if I'm wrong, 2/3 majority vote for most or many of our zoning applications. So we're making preservation a higher standard, if you will, than other restrictions on property that can be granted or taken away by city council or by plan commission action, et cetera.
I think the distinction here comes down to that owner consent, because with a zoning application, if you are not the owner, we require owner consent on those applications in order for consideration at all. That's not the case with a landmark application. So making the distinction for the 2/3 majority vote without the owner's consent is where we can make that requirement, make that distinction.
Okay.
Anything else?
But if there is owner consent, then we're saying.
Simple majority.
Simple majority.
Because that's the way it is with the planning and the zoning commission.
Okay.
Okay.
Right, if there's no other comments, then open it up to the public. All right. Okay. Marty, start over here, we'll go over to the.
Thank you. I have the same concern that I had earlier, and that's with outside groups and association, and I won't beat it into the ground, but I want it as part of the record that that is a concern. Knowing who these groups are, if we can't know in advance, we should have a process to vet them.
So they've written that down, we're gonna talk about it.
I understand that.
We're gonna
I
meet on the
appreciate
10th.
that. Owner consent not required for landmarking, yet hundreds of signatures have been presented requesting that owner consent be a part of it. Now, it's likely, however, with the caution that has been written into this process, that you will get some support for the way it is written. But I don't think you'll get support if you don't address the application process. And in that, I'm talking particularly, besides granting the authority to other people, I'm talking about fees. And, I wanted to ask you a question. Can you give me a dollar amount of what the fee would be? If I want to landmark your house, what would it cost me?
I don't have a fee for you. I'm sorry, I don't have a fee. Again, I think it's gonna differ from case to case.
Okay, but
What changes the fee, I guess?
Well, some of the costs that we can give you an estimate on would be like the cost of having a court reporter at the public hearing.
not asking about that. I'm talking
Those are
about.
some of the fees.
I think there should be, as you say, it's a very serious thing to put a landmark on my home, and especially without my consent. It's a very serious thing, and we should get the applicant to be as serious as possible. So to have some fee that might be found in some other process, $75, for instance, I think it's ridiculous. I think if it's going to cost me thousands of dollars for whatever reason, and I won't go into that, that the applicant should be required to spend a large fee. I don't know what a large fee means. To some, it might be $1,000, or it might be $500, but it certainly shouldn't be under $100.
If I may, the deposit we require for a public hearing in the Plan Commission review process is $500 strictly to cover the public hearing costs.
I'm not talking about public hearing.
But that's part of the
That's
fee.
part of the cost that we're asking the applicant to bear.
That's good.
Yes.
So 500 is not 75.
And then we also ask them to submit a $1,000 legal deposit to cover any legal expenses that the city might incur with that project.
Oh, okay.
So it's
that would.
$1,500 right off the bat?
$1,500 as deposits, and if they go over those deposits, we have them, we invoice them for anything over those deposits,
So it's a-
or replenish the deposit.
if I want to landmark your house, I don't know, do you live here? If I wanted to landmark, don't have to answer that. If I want to landmark your house, I have to put down at least $1,500 deposit. Is that
Well,
right?
those fees haven't been established, but those, I mean, they would be comparable, I believe, to the planning
Comparable.
commission's
Okay,
process.
then I would suggest, if it is $1,500, 1,000 of it be refundable if it's not used. But 500, just for the idea that you're going to come in and cause the owner to enter into some kind of negotiations, or to hire a lawyer, or to look into it himself. I think the applicant ought to have the same kind of pressure, and a $500 pressure might be appropriate. So anyhow, I would suggest that. When it comes, and I like the idea that you addressed the legal fees, and I think that's important. I think we learned our lesson over on Sunset on the legal fee thing. But I too would like to see that strengthened. I would like the applicant to have to sign, and I'm not a lawyer, but I would talk to your city attorney, have the applicant sign a hold harmless clause to hold the city of Geneva harmless when the lawsuit is brought against that applicant from a non-consenting owner, because that's going to happen. The lawsuit may be brought against, well, he ought to be told, the lawsuit may be brought against you, Mr. Applicant, and it may be brought against the city. If it's brought against the city, hold us harmless. Because I, as a citizen, I don't want to pay for that lawsuit. I want the applicant to pay for it. The preservation planner, as part of the procedures on landmarking, page 14, erects the sign on the property. Is that necessary? Does the city have the legal authority to do that? To come onto my property and put a sign up?
They have to.
Pardon?
They have to.
They have the legal authority.
For posting.
Pardon?
For posting the sign, yes,
Yep,
they
for-
have to.
On the property?
Right, and the easement, most
No,
properties
we didn't
have
say
an
easement. You're talking about on the property.
Isn't it,
And
isn't it
so
on
I'm-
easement, or is it on
Let me
property?
just ask the question. Let me get the rest of the question out.
We can look into that.
Do
I'm not-
you have the authority to put it on my property without
They're going to
asking
write
me?
that down, and they're going to figure it out.
Okay, that's good. And if the answer is yes, then my question is, why the heck would you do that? I mean, what purpose does it serve other than a slap in the face for the applicant that is agreeing? I just don't see the reason for doing it. Recording, and to the observation that was made by a couple of the commissioners, when you record on my deed that it is encumbered by something, an obligation to the regulations of the historic designation, that's pretty significant. Now, have you talked to real estate agents and real estate associations in your research? Do you know if my realtor is going to have to tell a prospective buyer that it's been landmarked, or that it could be landmarked by anybody? It scares the hell out of me. I like the idea that my house is historic in nature and not landmarked, because I can tell the prospective buyer, as I have, if you want to landmark it, I know a lot about landmarking, and I'd be glad to help you. If you don't want to landmark it, if you want to be like me and go for voluntary preservation, you don't have to landmark it. So I think you ought to, or have you talked to real estate agents?
I have talked with real estate agents. There's actually some very good documentation out there from real estate people across the country about the whole issue you're talking about, and by and large, it is not perceived as negative as you're believing it would be, because it has just as many what some of the studies have shown. Just as many people might be turned off by the idea of it being landmarked. There's a larger audience that might be very happy that it's landmarked because it's done. So it's turned out in the documentation. They're saying it's really kind of a wash that
And I've talked to both sides.
I know, but that recording does not really affect the ability to sell or increase the audience to a property.
And the city,
I'm telling you what
the city went through this process in the historic district. So all the titles on all the buildings in the historic district are.
Yeah, in the historic
it's on the
district.
title.
I'm talking, my house isn't in the
Right,
historic district.
but if it becomes
wouldn't have it on
landmarked,
yours.
And it isn't currently designated as a historic
Right.
landmark.
right,
Does my realtor have an obligation to their association and legally to tell a prospective buyer There is a law in the books with the city of Geneva that says that a group from the outside can come in and landmark this home.
Well, I mean, heck, my home could be landmarked. It's about 50 years old. But I don't believe there's any obligation for them, for a Realtor to come in and say, you know, this could be landmarked. It's any of our homes could be landmarked at some point.
I'm just asking the question, what does a real estate agent or an association say about their obligation when presenting it to the
I
market?
believe they have that obligation.
You do not believe they have that obligation? Okay. In the process, you talk about 350 feet, and that's a good, within 350 feet to notify the owners. That's good for a dense population. There are houses in my neighborhood where you'd be notifying 2 people. I think you need to notify a larger group, maybe a quarter of a mile on South Batavia Avenue, and maybe 350 feet in a densely populated neighborhood.
That's actually a really good point. Maybe it's 350 feet or up to 3 houses away, or, you know, some number of houses away.
That has been a requirement here in the past, and it gets very confusing to people when they go and try to go to the county and get that list of addresses. What is 2 lots away, because it used to be X amount of feet and two additional lots, or however that was, whatever the greater amount is. And it was very, very frustrating to get the information correctly with applicants going over to the county and trying
But
to get
then
that
that's also where the sign comes in handy, because
Right.
people would see the sign.
Right.
Well, I just don't agree. I think you need to notify, more people in a neighborhood if that's going to happen.
Well, wouldn't it go to a public hearing as well?
It is.
Yeah.
Pardon me?
It's going to go to a public hearing as well,
Mhm.
so potentially the entire city would be notified.
If it goes to a public hearing, you have to notify people. Who do you have to notify?
That's part of this, is a 350-foot notice of this, to surrounding property owners. That's a mail notice to surrounding property owners within 350 feet. We have to
That's
publish
on.
it in a newspaper, talking about
Okay,
posting it
so-
on the website.
So the public
Possibly
hearing
placing a
would
sign
be
on
the
the
same,
property.
the same 3 neighbors.
No, the public hearing would be the entire city of Geneva.
I mean, you'd have to notify the same 3
Everybody,
neighbors.
everybody would be notified in the city.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next one over here. How about you first, and then you in the back? You want to give your name and address again, just in case?
Sure. Chris Bordage, 40 South Lincoln. I just wanted to ask what the reasoning was for not obtaining owner consent prior to an application being filed for historic landmark. Why not get the owner consent right out of the box?
Well, there's several reasons for that. One is that the owner of record may not be known. A property could be held by a trust or what have you, where it's very difficult to find that information out for an applicant. That's one example. It may be a property that's owned by a corporation and trying to figure out who the owners are. It's different with with an individual property owner. But there again, sometimes when people are applying for strictly on historic merit, they're more concerned at the onset, and that's why we want to meet with them, because they're only thinking about maybe the historic or the architectural character, and we have to expose them that there's other factors they need to be considering as part of their application process. So it's often, in nominating properties, whether it's to the National Register or at the local level, is an education process for people, because sometimes they haven't done this before.
Okay, I find it odd that somebody would want to landmark somebody else's property, but if you have to notify the property owner anyway within the 5 days, then maybe they should be doing their due diligence to find out who the owner is to get the consent. So I kind of disagree with the process. I think the owner consent should be first and foremost. That should be there as soon as the application is being filed. It should have owner consent attached to it. The other question, number 7, withdrawal by the applicant. I noticed that and I know we're not in the next section yet for historic district designation, but there's a withdrawal by owner objection. I don't see one in this section. Shouldn't there be a withdrawal by owner objection for historic landmark as well?
That's, the lack of owner consent requires the 2/3 majority vote from the Historic Preservation Commission.
Correct, but why wouldn't they be able to withdraw it? Why wouldn't the owner, by objecting to it, be able to withdraw the application? Why would they have to wait for a vote?
Well, the application may still have merit. I think we're going to, I think the example hasn't been brought up yet, but, the reality is that in 22 years, I believe the number is, there have been 2 non-owner consent nominations brought forward, just 2 in 22 years. There's not an abuse of the non-owner consent provision. And that's one of the things you want to test ordinance against is, is there abuse of it that needs to be corrected. In one case, the application was withdrawn, the most recent one, but the Riverbanks Laboratory property, the owners were not interested in landmarking it initially, and it was a non-owner consent nomination, and I don't think anybody would disagree with the outcome of it, and I wasn't here when it was done, but that is a very worthy landmark in Geneva that probably would have been lost if it had not gone through the non-owner consent process. And in the end, a viable and interested owner stepped forward and did a beautiful job of restoring that property and putting a vitality that probably wouldn't have happened without someone filing a non-owner consent petition, nomination. So it's not something to be entered into lightly. It's not something that has happened with, not even with increasing frequency. It hasn't happened with frequency at all. I mean, 2 times in 22 years is not a very strong track record. That owner consent has proven to be a dangerous vehicle here in Geneva for owners who are concerned with that. And there is a time for it. Again, one of the quotes that I think was very timely concerning owner consent out of one of the sources I looked at talked about, especially in this attitude of foreclosure or not attitude, but this climate of foreclosure and some other things where you have people who have an interim interest in a property, and that's all. They're not here because they care about the community of Geneva. They're not here because they care about history. They're not here because they care about their neighbors. They're an interim property, a bank from some state or whatever that may not be maintaining the property or may not be motivated to do anything with the property that's helping the neighborhood. And in a case like that, they have no interest in stewardship. They have no interest in what the neighbors really think. They're strictly in it for the dollars. In some case like that, to have a non-owner consent provision is very helpful to a community. And again, I would assert, and I have only been here 2 years, so I'm not, and I don't live here, but I would say that if we saw a rash of nominations coming forward that were abusing the non-owner consent, I would say it really should probably be very strongly looked at because it's maybe not being applied correctly in the community. But in the Geneva community, in its history, it's not been something that's been abused, and there are times when having non-owner consent is very, very beneficial for a community.
I understand what you're saying. However, I don't like the door being opened for even the small amount of cases that could come with, an owner objecting to it. So I think that that's of paramount importance, and I think that it should be able to be withdrawn with an owner objection as well. And I understand your point about corporate ownership and that sort of thing. However, somebody who doesn't have financial stake in that property, they should have financial stake in the property in order to be able to designate something as a landmark. It is a big responsibility. It's a big thing to do to somebody as a property, to designate it as a landmark. So I think that owner consent is paramount.
Well, and I'm not being argumentative. I don't want to be perceived as argumentative, but I have had calls who are from residents who believe, and not just in this community, but in other communities I've worked in, who believe that it is a financial stake, but it is something that concerns them as a resident of the community to have a communal concern about what the character of their community is. So it is a two-edged sword, that there is definitely the individual property rights of what happens to your property, but there's also this community right that has to be balanced of people have an expectation of what the community is. And Geneva has quite a reputation of being a community that's based with a very significant historic character. I mean, it's one of the calling cards for Geneva. So there is that balance, and it has to be very carefully weighed, and that's why I think that the requirement for a pre-application meeting is a very wise element here, so that people understand what they're getting themselves into. Is it something that should be used free, with a lot of freedom and wildness? No, but there are cases where not having it has proven very detrimental to some communities that have lost very significant buildings and then have gone back. In fact, one of the articles that was published that I referred to commented that the communities that have taken out non-owner consent have regretted it and usually try to put it back in very quickly, and those who had no owner consent and put owner and then put an owner consent clause in, or vice versa, they were just as unhappy. So it is not a perfect solution, but there are times when owner consent is very valuable to a community.
By lost, what do you mean lost?
Well, you look at the North Shore right now, and there's been several articles in the last few years of very significant homes by very significant architects that have been demolished or let go, and it's been a real concern in those neighborhoods because people bought in those neighborhoods expecting there was a certain character they were buying into, and those houses have been lost. And once the building's gone, it's gone.
But now that you've addressed the demolition where you have to have permits and reviews to have it demolished, wouldn't that kind of cover that?
If it's designated.
Okay.
If it's not designated, it's not.
Yeah, and then it goes to the simple one that David was talking about, where you just file an application and boom, it's gone.
You mean designated as a historic district, not as a historic landmark?
Or an individual landmark or district.
And of course, the ultimate here is that the city council then has the ultimate decision. If it turns out that a building is landmarked without owner consent, and the owner is unhappy after the whole process happens, and it is landmarked, then city council, they can take that objection to city council.
Before it gets landmarked.
Before it's landmarked, they can take that objection to city council, and then city council has the ultimate authority for that.
Okay.
What we've tried to do is we've tried to add some teeth to help that property owner if they don't have consent. We're talking about a 2/3 majority vote by us and a 2/3 by the city council.
I like the chances of I'm on the owner's side, I guess. I would prefer not to have my house landmarked unless I wanted to do it.
Right. Well, I will say also that in Illinois, homeowners and property owners are protected to a greater degree because unlike some states, appeals of the Historic Preservation Commission go to the local governing body, where in many states it bypasses the governing council and goes straight to circuit court. Or goes to some other court of appeals. It actually has legal costs involved with it. So with the way the Illinois law is established, it allows it to stay in the local level and and have the conversation at the local level and not go to some larger court that or non-connected entity to the local community.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you. And we're at 10 o'clock now. I want to try to finish this up, so just if you can keep your comments concise. Yep, you're next.
My name is Madeline Roth. I live at 520 Ray Street. And after listening to all of this, I hope that there might be a way to compromise on protecting property owners' rights and still have preservation in Geneva. I think, first of all, I want to ask a question. Do other cities let just anyone file an application to designate a property? Yes. I can understand the Historic Preservation Commission. Really? Like what other city?
What other cities?
Yeah, name.
Well, you've got Winnetka, Urbana. I don't have that whole list, but I've got stats.
But would it be the majority, or the majority of the towns letting their city do it, the historic commission within the city, not just citizens and groups? I think that to allow just anyone to file an application on someone's home without their knowledge or permission, I think is unconscionable, really. It just, I don't understand that. I could understand the Historic Preservation Commission doing it. And so I was wondering if that was the majority of the way people are doing it, that you just let anyone do it. Anyone wreak havoc on your life.
Without actually writing down and looking, I don't want to say if there's a majority or not a majority. I suspect it's a majority of those that have preservation ordinances in place.
Is that something you can bring
But
on the 10th?
I can check with Illinois
I
Historic
find that
Preservation.
to be sort of extraordinary, but I don't know. I would like more information on that and hope the,
Can I just clarify what you just said? I'm not sure I heard you correctly. So you would be okay with a non-owner consent if it's brought by the Historic Preservation Commission?
no, I wouldn't be okay with it, but it seems more logical than just letting people do this. It seems like it's an opportunity for, I'm not sure what will happen, just allowing any citizen to be able to do it.
Okay, so.
Or someone from outside the town, I guess.
No, you have to be within the town.
Okay, but you said groups or organizations,
Has to have a representative from inside the
but
town.
just a representative.
Yeah.
So it
And-
could be
and you're
people from
put- And you're
everywhere.
putting some money down.
Pardon?
So, and you're putting some money down, so,
Uh-huh.
you know, for an individual to do this is a big deal for an individual to do it.
Well, you know, I was doing a little research today, and I learned in the village of Oak Park, Illinois, where they have, I think, about 60 landmark buildings, they seek owner consent. Their application, there's a place for the owner to sign. And I thought, now look, they've got so much to protect there. And they've done 60, and they said they seek the owner consent on principle. And I thought, maybe we could learn something from Oak Park.
But on
You
the
know-
other hand, Winnetka does not.
Well, I think Oak Park is, you know,
I lived in Oak Park for 25 years. So I have a perspective.
well, they have a lot
Of the
of
town.
great, you know, buildings.
They do
More than
indeed.
Winnetka would have, I would think.
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so?
No.
No?
Well, let's not start grading cities.
Okay, all right, we're in
Geneva's
Geneva.
number one, and everyone else is five.
Right, sorry.
You know,
Everybody has their heritage.
They do.
if the landmark designation is made, then this goes on your deed or your title report, right?
Yes.
Now, homes that are in the historic district, do they have this on their deed too?
In Geneva, they do.
They do, okay.
Not always, but in Geneva, they went through the effort to do that.
I feel like if someone does this to your property and it goes through, it really will change, especially when you're not in the historic district. I think it's more financially a problem than if you are in the historic district. To me, it's a little bit like eminent domain without financial compensation. You can't
but there's-
do with your property what you maybe thought you could do or wanted to do. You wanted to put that addition on, and maybe
Well, that's
somebody's
part of
going
why
to
they
object.
put it on the title.
But then,
that
So
you
you
know
can't do it, right?
You know before you close what you can and
Well,
cannot.
it
Well, no,
it
but
doesn't
I'm talking
preclude
about
you
is
from
this-
doing things to your,
No, it doesn't at all.
it does not.
preclude you at
You
all.
just, there's a process, just like in the historic district, you can still put an addition on your home, but you just have to go through a process to get it. You have to come in front of this commission and find out. And it doesn't stop you from doing things.
Right.
in addition, there is benefits to being historically designated, and that would not be available to somebody who's not designated. There's significant tax benefits, which is a monetary thing. In addition, there's benefits to the community that we've already gone into. So it's not simply,
Restriction.
it's not all bad, let's put it that way.
Well, I do agree with what Marty said, that I see this becoming an issue with realtors having to disclose this to prospective buyers, that if you buy in an older home in Geneva, you could be your home maybe would always be in jeopardy or vulnerable to having it be landmarked, and it may not be what you want to do with the money that you've invested in the property.
Well, if you look at most listing sheets for properties in the historic district, the first thing they say, be in the Geneva Historic District.
As a positive.
As a marketing tool, not as a, better not look at this house because it's in the historic district.
And I purchased my home last year, and I'm not in the historic district, and nobody, and I think we're actually eligible for the conservation district, and my realtor did not tell us that. So I don't think that they're obligated.
No, they're not obligated.
And I
at
think
all.
what David was saying earlier, I mean, there's a lot of actions that can be potentially taken on any property within the municipality through zoning and what have you. And there's no obligation of a realtor to go through that whole litany of all the potential scenarios that could happen on a piece of property.
Well, they may not have to disclose it, but it might just become something that people learn about.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
But and I just wonder if that will backfire, where people will be more interested in buying new homes than old because of the risk of buying the old house. I mean, buying an old house is it's a challenge to take care of it. And then just to know that you're not in the historic district, because perhaps you didn't want to be, but you wanted an old home, and it's vulnerable to somebody landmarking it.
You know, one other thing, don't forget, is that, as was brought up, this has only been exercised twice in 22 years.
I know,
One of them
I know.
lost, and the other one was a significant save. 22 years, it's still a big point to remember, and
So what is driving this now? Is it just to formalize it, making an ordinance? How are you, if you've already had the ability to do this, how is this different now? You're just making it a more formal ordinance, or what?
The ordinance process was initiated because the existing ordinance is 20 years old. It was time to be updated. And so there's not a person who's out there, pushing this agenda or anything. It was an ordinance that a lot of things have happened in the 20 years that were either being done as a matter of policy or as a matter of protocol, but really weren't codified. And so the issue of owner consent, like I said, I look back through the files, and it's been discussed at least 4 times since 1995 here. Most recently, 2011, I think, was the date, those of you who were here. It was discussed at great length, PowerPoint presentations, all sorts of things, public meetings on it, and the ultimate conclusion was to retain the owner consent in 2011. So it's not something that's new, it's not something that's being pushed by some particular, agenda or anything. It was part of a comprehensive redraft of the ordinance. And I did read the position guide that Mr. Smirchus had shared with us. I've read a lot of different documentation. I've talked with people. And again, the overwhelming response that I've gotten is, the question is, has owner consent been abused in your community? And when I've talked with other preservation colleagues and people who do this, they're like, 2 cases in 22 years is not, is not an alarming amount of this being applied. And so, based on those discussions, based on some of the other requirements that are in this position paper that I've incorporated into the ordinance for the review of the commission, I've tried to take a very balanced approach to allowing that door to be slightly opened for those cases where owner consent really is essential to help save a building that is important or beloved to the community. Again, I think with some of these recommendations the commission has made with pre-application meetings and what have you, I think that people will really take pause in making sure this is something they want to pursue and making sure this is a landmark that's worth going after. We've also, like I said, updated the notification process. So there's a lot more communication going on in this process than has ever been introduced before in Geneva, with the process of having open communication, not trying to surprise a homeowner with an application. So it's really trying to create an open vehicle to have these discussions. I've put together nominations in a lot of communities, and I really there's a lot of times I would not have invested the 40, 50, 60, 100 hours to put a nomination together if I knew that I was going to be run up against a brick wall. I've got a lot of other things to do with my time. And I think a lot of people feel that way. But if it's a strong enough property that has such significance, like Riverbank Labs, it might be worth the fight. And the only way that would have been accomplished is with the non-owner consent provision being in the ordinance as an option.
I think it's the property on Sunset that, with what happened there, that
Yeah.
kind of
Have a
alarmed
bad
people and, left a bad taste in people's mouths,
Well,
so.
hopefully some of that will be codified better in this ordinance so that the good things, so that
that-
won't happen again.
All right.
Thank you. Yes, next here.
My name is Teresa Keenan. I am a Geneva resident, 1765 Southampton Court. I own a small but very successful real estate firm here in Geneva. I can assure you there's a very big difference between living in the historic district and having your home historically landmarked. We've sold over $100 million worth of real estate in the past 4 years, so I feel that I do have a certain amount of knowledge about local buyers and sellers here in Geneva. With all due respect, when somebody asks, does the realtor have to disclose? We don't have to disclose when sex offenders are in the neighborhood, but you can bet your money that I do that for my buyers. When I'm driving through Geneva, I will tell somebody, guess what? Call the state's attorney's office. You have somebody in your neighborhood you should be concerned about. Any good realtor, much to your point too, would point out to their buyers, if you have a buyer who's going to spend $1 million on a property or $100,000 on a property, you better darn well be able to tell that buyer, guess what? In the future, this is what could happen to you in Geneva. Your home could be landmarked against your wishes. So I respect what you're saying, but I really disagree. Any good realtor should be telling these buyers what could happen out here. And when you say it isn't abused, it's only been done twice in 20 years, it is abuse if you're the recipient of it. That's like saying a father who hit his kid, he only did it one time, so it wasn't abuse. It is abuse. I was a board member for the History Center for 3 years. I'm a frequent patron and supporter of the Preservation Partners. I'm not into tearing down a house. I've lived in 2 homes out of 4 that anybody else would have torn down. I love old and charming homes. Love them. So I'm not here to say, let's tear anything down. I'm not a proponent of tearing anything down. I'm here to ask if you would have a little more consideration and not kick this thing down the road. Have some consideration for the homeowner. Because my opinion is if this gets used one time and somebody's home is landmarked against their wishes, it's going to be abuse. I would ask you just a small exercise. Take your historic preservation hat off for 1 minute and imagine owning a home that you've lived in for 30 years. And perhaps you're thinking the sale of your home would one day fund your retirement or your children's inheritance, okay? Continue to imagine now that anyone in Geneva has the power to impede your property values. In the 25 years that I've sold real estate, I've never sold a home that's historically landmarked. I've had people who have purchased homes and then gone on to landmark them. I've never seen one resell in Geneva. Okay? So we're empowering someone to drastically impact the lives of one of our fellow community citizens. Okay? I'm in very strong disagreement with giving that kind of power to anybody. I think we need to look long and hard at the ramifications of this process, and we need to remember, first and foremost, this community isn't about homes. Geneva is not about homes, any kind of houses. I've seen thousands of houses in 25 years, some very amazing homes. Our community is made up of people. It's not just the homes, okay? So I can't name a single person in Geneva that I would want to do this to. We don't do things to each other. We do things for each other here. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next.
Chuck Ellenbaum, 707 Shady Avenue, Geneva. Just when we look at property rights, you have the property rights of an owner of a particular property, but you also have the property rights of the people in the neighborhood. And across the street from my house was one of the 2 cottages that Mayor Fargo built for his daughter. The speculator who bought it kicked the tenants out, turned the heat off, left the water on over the winter, and what a surprise. It was demolition by neglect. People in the neighborhood, headed by Gerard Keating, offered to buy the house from the guy and have him rehab it, and he said no. So I think 2 cases, one successful in 22 years, is not an abuse. I think speculators letting houses go to rack and ruin are an abuse of the neighborhood. You have all kinds of property rights that extend beyond your property. And there is so many hoops you have to jump in this that it's not something you do willy-nilly. The idea of somebody running around, I'm going to try to designate this house and that house, and I don't like you, so I'm going to do yours, is hysteric. It's not going to happen. There's enough checks and balances, and you have the city council as a backup. If you don't like what the city council does, elect new members. But I think property rights have limits. It is not absolute. And when you're going to rape the historical character of a neighborhood just to make a few more bucks profit or build 2 houses in a lot that held 1, that has to be stopped. And if I'm doing it, stop me.
Thank you. Liz, do you have something?
I had a question, but now I'm so lost
You want Colin to go first so you can figure, you find it?
Yes. The first question I have is, Michael, why was this section on a rescinding of designation added?
That's fairly common language in most contemporary historic preservation ordinances because there should be a process also for rescinding a nomination, and it's silent, so we have no direction as to what our process should be.
Okay, so you did find this in other examples?
Right.
Okay. I just want to kind of make a summary statement and then also maybe a request. Mr. Chairman, would it be possible to address the next session at your future meeting? Because we have lost so many people tonight on all sides of the issue who clearly have work or whatever they have. You know, school teacher over here had to leave and people here were.
Yeah, the only
Okay.
thing, and I don't mind leaving this one
could you
open.
could you
It just
consider
comes
that?
down to I just want to make sure
No.
that we don't start repeating ourselves.
No.
'Cause we don't need
Okay.
to hear the same thing 10 times.
Correct, okay. But I do feel like the city has made a huge effort here to look very thoughtfully at this comprehensive ordinance and this draft. And this is really good for us going into the future, that I think the city should be very proud of this approach. And I really don't, I'm not sure Chuck mentioned this, and I'm not sure you did, but you have added one more layer of protection, actually 2, and that is the requirement of the 2/3 at the commission level and at the council level. There are many layers of protection. So I think this has been a good, thoughtful process. Congratulations.
Thank you. Come on up, Colin.
Colin Campbell, 18 South 6th Street. First of all, I want to echo what Liz said, that the process, I think, is very fair and very thorough and very complete and very honest. And as several of you have said, in effect, your job and the job of the city council is to balance the rights of the city and the rights of the people of the city against the rights of the individual. And as the always logical Mr. Spock of Star Trek fame said many times, the rights of the many outweigh the rights of the few or the one. That's what a community is about. And you need to find the balance where it goes. On this issue of notification, and I agree that it could be an awful problem if I had filed a building permit and was getting ready to rock and roll on something, and somebody came in and stopped me. That's a problem. Could you develop an option for any owner who has a house that qualifies for landmarking, that if they intend to demolish the house or make a significant modification, that before they file application for a building permit, that through the city or with the city's help and consent, that they file an intent to do whatever it is that they want to do, that would be published to neighbors and published generally throughout the city. The owner of 18 South 6th Street intends to tear down his house and build a bowling alley or something, you know, of that nature. So it's published generally. And anybody who would like to stop that and landmark the property has a designated 15, 20, 30 days to file an intent to landmark. Now the owner knows that somebody is going to landmark. If that isn't filed within the time, then they wouldn't be able to file an application to landmark.
You want to write it down and?
Think it over. It gives the owner a little bit of a layer of protection there, and it wouldn't, you know, the whole process wouldn't take more than a month or so. And when you're dealing with something this serious, a month is not going to kill anything. But you have a limitation that the landowner can't be blindsided. At least they'll have an idea, oh, so-and-so's going to file an application. Might be a good time for the two of them to sit down and see if they can work something out. And the city doesn't have to become involved at all.
The concern I have with that, Colin, is that he said that Colin started that any property that could be landmarked.
That would be Nanette's.
Well, what that's presuming is that we know every building that can be landmarked in the city, but you know, we're not just talking architecture here. We're talking that it could be associated with a significant person. Sometimes we don't know that without some research. Someone may not know that. You know, if someone came in with a pre-application meeting and was wanting to nominate a building that had no architectural merit, but it was old, we would tell them it doesn't meet that criteria.
Mm-hmm.
However, they may also have some information that, you know, the founder of Geneva was born there, or not born there, but maybe lived there, and that has nothing to do with the architecture. So there's so many variables that this commission considers as to what makes something significant. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how that could really be orchestrated as, from what you're talking about, because any project potentially has significance to it, and that's what this commission tries to resolve, is understanding when landmarks come before us, does it truly meet the criteria that we've established in the ordinance? And
At some point, that has to be established, yeah, as you said. But if the landowner, the property owner, said, okay, maybe, we don't know, but maybe somebody could come forward and file an application on this, and they put up public notice for that, and nobody comes forward, then they're held harmless. They can go ahead with it, even if somebody comes along later and says, oh, now I want to put in an application, it's too late. They had an opportunity, they didn't do it.
Right.
So it would be an exploratory process more than anything else.
Yeah.
But it would give the landowner that one more inch of protection and prevent them from being blindsided.
I think the opportunity to file the landmark application is always there and can be filed at any time regardless of an intention to do work or not.
You can change that.
But once, well, again, it comes back to knowing which properties could be landmarked, and I don't think we can answer those.
I think maybe you could work out well, all I'm thinking of is some way to relieve that burden on the property owner of maybe I will have my contractors lined up and everything ready to go, and somebody comes in and stops me, and that's where the unreasonable expense comes in.
I think you're just putting another layer that isn't required in my mind, because it seems that, you know, it's a, I just don't see that as another layer we need.
Well, we talked about, not having that provision for people who already have permits.
Yeah, unpermitted,
Right.
any unpermitted work would be subject to it, but if it was
So-
permitted before the application, so I think we can handle that in a very simple
Language, yeah.
way, and still accomplish what you're looking for, and again, give, you know, owners fair notice, without adding that extra layer.
Yeah, I agree.
Any other comments? All right,
I just want to check on that. I just want to get clarification.
okay. Can you give us your name and address?
Paul Pickowitz, 629 Peck.
I'm sorry, the first name again? What was your name?
Pickowitz, Pikowitz. So you can designate at any time. Doesn't matter, right? Anybody can come in there, designate a house as historical, they can come in. File the application.
Anybody could file an application, correct.
And earlier, I think kind of what you just said just now is that if the house is, if everything's already permitted, it's done. We can't stop anything, everything goes, so you can't designate, somebody can just come in and stop everything, correct?
That's what we're looking at right now.
It isn't codified yet.
Right.
Yeah, so we go in, I present all my plans, I get my permits, I'm in there, I start the process, somebody comes along and goes, oh man, I don't want this, and they try to designate it. They can't stop me, correct, or can they?
Well, what we're talking about with what the change made, that it would be the scenario you're talking about, yes.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking, because he presented it in a little different way, but my understanding was, we're gonna look at trying to
If you're already permitted.
permitted.
You get to finish your
We're kind of done with the designation portion of it. Somebody can't come in there and stop it, because I think the burden, I think what we're trying to do here is, you know, I agree with it, but I think it should be a difficult process. I don't think it should be an easy process for somebody to come in and just say, you know, I think, you know, Marty was saying, you know, $500. I think it should be like $1,000 or $5,000 to come in there to do something like this, because this burden becomes pretty cumbersome on some of the people that are doing it. I agree with it, but it shouldn't be an easy process. I don't think anybody should just be able to walk in and do it.
Well, I do just want to say, it's not an easy process. for
Oh,
somebody to
no,
put
no,
the
I
information
tell you
that
what,
we
I tell
request,
you-
just so you're aware that.
If you're telling me that I gotta put down $150 to designate somebody's house, that's pretty easy. And just to
But
start
the
a process.
application is more than just the $150.
Yeah, well, to fill out an application that's maybe 20 pages, I mean.
Well, it's extremely time consuming.
40 to 100 hours.
Yeah. Yeah, well, you know, if somebody is determined.
It's true.
That's true.
It's true, and they may not be determined for the correct reasons.
Right.
So I think it should be a difficult process. I think organizations that would want to come in here, they shouldn't be able to do something like that. You got to be really tied down. Instead of making it easier, or, you know, making sure that everyone can do it, I would make it harder for people to do.
Yeah, I don't think we've made the process easier. I think we've.
Well, earlier you did say we're trying, you know, when we were trying to put limitations on the organizations, you're like, well, we don't want to limit this, we don't want to limit that. I want it limited.
Well, what I was saying, I don't think I said that we want to open. I said if there's an organization that has representation in the local community, we don't want to rule them out. And there have been cases, for instance, there have been communities that have fought to save buildings, and they've called in an organization like a statewide advocacy group such as Landmarks Illinois to help provide guidance and assistance for them, and they've been sometimes a co-applicant. And I think that's the kind of expertise that everybody can benefit from.
And I don't disagree with that, but all these processes can be abused fairly easily.
I feel like there's a lot of checks and balances that
And I do too.
we've developed.
I mean,
You know,
and kind of the proof's in the pudding.
They have to fill out the application, they have to pay the fee, they have to come through the Historic Preservation Commission, they have to go through City Council, they have to go through a public hearing.
And I think we all need to keep in mind that what we're talking about here, we have not voted on, and it has not gone to city
Right.
council. So none of this is
Is
real.
actually really,
And it's a ways down the line before it is actually real.
I understand that, but, you know, the meeting that I attended, it was a couple years ago. The tone and what we're discussing is not what we discussed at the tail end of that meeting. It's not the same. It's totally different. We've got ordinances that, I just found out the other day, and that type of thing and stuff like that. So when we left that meeting, we kind of understood that we were going in one direction. This seems to have taken us into a little different direction here.
Okay.
I don't disagree with it, but I think that it should be a hard process for everyone to come and do that. And I know you think it's hard, but you need to make it harder.
Right.
So, thank you.
Well, what I would say is, can it be quick or, okay. Gotta come up here. We gotta make it difficult for you. You gotta come up here, you gotta give us your name. Tell us where you live.
Paula Pickwitz, 629 Peck Road. Yes, I'm married to Paul.
Okay. Same house.
I just wanted to say, just really quickly to, sort of piggyback onto what Teresa said. I've born and raised in Geneva, lived here my whole life, and this has always been about community. And living here, I've my whole life heard people move in and out and in and out. And they're coming in and out. A lot of times they mention the prestige and the look, and it's all about the superficial things. And it really is, when you get down to it, the people who stay and love it. It's about the people who live here. And for me, out of this whole thing and everything I've read, you guys have done a great job in doing the amendments that, were really sort of upsetting to some of us who live in a certain area. But it's the principle of permitting the owner's consent. It's the principle. And to me, that belongs with who we are as people in the city of Geneva. And it saddens me if we move forward and not give the owner's consent. And that's all I have to say.
All right, thank you. Okay, we're gonna leave this item open. One more?
Yeah, I just think we should have another meeting.
We are, that's what I'm.
Good, and maybe to have some real-world examples, right? So that one can learn what are the loops and the difficulties, so that the people are informed.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to leave this item open on historic designation, and then we're going to also talk about districts and conservation districts next time, and hopefully get everything aired. And so
we're continuing going through this next.
Yeah, we've got 2.5 items left.
Okay.
That's March 10th, right?
What?
March 10th.
10th.
In our next meeting.
Our next meeting is March 10th.
Motion.
And just wanted you to check the website, and then I think the city will be emailing stuff out to you too, so you're going to have an opportunity to review all this stuff and be able to comment on it. So with that, I would like to make a motion to continue this to March 10th.
Second?
Second.
Solomon?
Yep. All those in favor say aye.
Who's second? Who's it?
Salmon.
Motion to continue to a date certain.
Then who motioned?
No, we need a motion.
Oh, okay, okay. Sorry.
Was that a date certain?
What?
March 10th.
Could you make it to a date certain, March 10th?
We haven't adjourned
Yes.
yet.
Yeah.
One moment.
All right, a motion to adjourn? Second. All in favor say aye.
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 We drinking?